Getting the thumbs up, we're good to go here. If we can get started this morning, I think our first item is Planning and Development Committee. So I am going to go to Director Knodel to chair that one. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda for the July 6, 2023 Planning and Development Committee meeting. Is there a mover? Moved Director Pendergraft, second Director Coyne. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. First and only item is the effective audit on environmentally sensitive development permit. I think this is one we've long been awaiting. CAO Newell, would you do the honors?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So yeah, we've been looking at our environmentally sensitive development permits for over a year now. We were concerned initially that we didn't have the tools to adequately enforce them, and that they weren't really fitting all of our regional district. We were concerned about the mapping. We had a lot of issues. So we came up with a proposal to amend our use of those to just subdivisions and zoning rather than at the building permit stage. And then in the meantime, the provincial and federal governments volunteered to come in and help us review our use of these ESDPs, and they've retained Stantec to do an audit on them, and now, Mr. Chair, they're prepared to present on that audit. So we can just turn that over to our delegation.
Good morning, everyone. I assume that is myself leading the delegation. So my name is Todd Kemper. I'm a conservation planner with the Canadian Wildlife Service. Myself is here. Andrea Tanaka, who is also a conservation planner, is here, as well as Lucy Reese. Jamie Leatham is here with the province as well. So we have a very short presentation to provide. Hopefully, is there a simple way that I can share my screen?
And Todd, hi everyone. My name's Jamie Leatham and I work for the province as a ecosystems biologist. And I think that Celine Davis is also here. She is a director of ecosystems out of our branch office as well. And I think we were hoping to do a little intro, but I'm just going to make sure that she's here. Where do I see participants? She might just be taking a moment. So maybe when it's my turn to present, I'll let her introduce herself if that works.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Francisco, can you aid Mr. Kemper in getting his presentation up, please, sir?
Okay, let me know if you can see the presentation now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you again for allowing us the opportunity to speak to you today. And I apologize, I was hoping to be there in person. However, I had some car trouble, so the virtual presence was necessary. We have a very brief presentation, and really what we're hoping to do here is introduce sort of why the Federal Wildlife Service has taken interest in this issue, an overview of some of the results of that collaborative audit that was previously mentioned, as well as some information that we feel the committee should have at hand as it deliberates these issues. Oh, I can't advance the slides. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so really quickly, why is the Federal Wildlife Service interested in the regional district of Okanagan-Similkameen? What you're looking at here is a heat map. So one of the pieces of federal legislation that obviously overlaps with local land use and local land use decisions is the Species at Risk Act. This is a heat map of critical habitat designated under that act. So anywhere that you see yellow, there's critical habitat designated for at least one species. Darker and darker shades mean you have critical habitat designations for more and more species within that particular area. When we zoom in on the RDOS, it becomes quite clear the importance of the Okanagan Valley from Penticton to roughly the 49th parallel. this dark red polygon that you see here, there's roughly 70 federally identified species at risk within this region, and there's critical habitat identified for about 30 of them. And so we ask ourselves, what is the biggest threat to these species and to their habitats? We've actually come at this from a couple of different angles. One of which was a review of federal recovery documents under the Species Risk Act. So this is recovery plans, CACIVRC reports, action plans, etc. And we've mined those to look at what the species experts have said was the threat. The answer there comes up that generally housing and residential expansion is the key threat. The other way we've approached this, and I think some of these data have been provided before, is what is the measurable impact of these? So this chart that you're looking at here shows a GIS analysis that we did comparing available imagery from 2004 and 5 to 2021. So basically our GIS analysts went in, zoomed in on a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid and looked at where habitat has been lost and converted, nibbled away, and they attributed those losses to particular events. So what you're seeing here is that about 70% of the habitat loss in that period of time was due to housing and residential expansion. It's important to note actually that this is actually just a subset of RDOS. This is not the entire regional district. It's basically that valley. It's that dark red polygon. But I think where this becomes relevant is that, again, this is sort of a nibbling of habitat. It's not a single huge event, but it's that these habitat conversions were authorized under local instruments. The other reason that we're here today, so recognizing the challenges that so many species at risk place, the Federal Wildlife Service has made considerable investments into conservation and conservation planning within the region, including about $750,000 to RDOS to support the SOSCP, of which roughly half contributed to the ESD process in one way or another, largely through the mapping of sensitive ecosystems and critical habitat, implementation of the Shared Environmental Planner, as well as an audit and evaluation that took place in 2018. On that note, SOSCP and RDOS spearheaded an audit after 1 year of the new policies, 2017. So this audit began in 2018. It was done in collaboration with RDOS, QPs, the province, etc., and included some recommendations, including recommendations to have better guidance for ratepayers on why ESDPs exist, when a permit is or shouldn't be necessary, what kind of development impacts can have on the natural environment, better guidance for the QEPs carrying out these tools, as well as what we felt was important was pre-screening to eliminate unnecessary permits and monitoring and evaluation of compliance to understand if they're working or not. Understanding again, though, that that requires more internal resources and expertise. Following that audit, RDOS staff expressed concern, as was mentioned at the outset of this meeting, that the amendments that took place in 2017 really weren't achieving the intended goal of protecting the environment, that they were more or less just a regulatory burden on ratepayers and a burden on overstretched RDOS staff. So at that time, as you know, RDOS directors brought forward a motion to amend those ESDPs, that was bylaw 2912, suggesting that it only be triggered by subdivision and rezoning, removing the clearing of lots, building of houses, etc. Guidance at that time also suggested that staff should report on options to increase the effectiveness of these tools, and that in no way should they prevent or discourage fire smarting of properties or emergency preparedness, which we would obviously approve of and agree with. ACCC, that being us, the Federal Wildlife Service, received the bylaw amendment referral and provided our preliminary suggestions in December of 2020. On behalf of the board, RDOS staff asked us for specific recommendations, which were provided in a letter on April 22nd, 2021. Sorry, my dog is talking to us. In that letter, we very much supported subdivision and zoning as a trigger for environmental review, but we advised that RDOS should consider retaining rather than eliminating triggers related to alteration of land and development, development permits, construction of buildings, because ultimately this is where the rubber hits the road and this is where critical habitat can be lost. We also provided some very specific examples of edits and wording and exemptions that we felt would eliminate unnecessary permit applications. And these basically followed very similar exemptions that exist in the Federal Species at Risk Act and other pieces of federal legislation. We further advised that the 2018 audit provided some very useful suggestions and should be considered. And again, reiterated that monitoring and enforcement was necessary to understand if these tools work properly. Importantly, at that time, we also offered funding to RDOS to increase staff capacity to conduct those tools if needed or wanted. So following these communications, back and forth discussions, RDOS staff productively entered into discussions with the province and CWS on how we could better evaluate the effectiveness of these tools. None of us really had a sense, to be honest, data-driven sense, if they were working. So in essence, what we agreed to was a third-party contract to investigate 5 key questions seen here. And RDOS staff kindly offered up their records so that we could carry out this audit. So the 5 key questions quite simply are ESDPs effective at mitigating impacts of development? Is the process having a measurable benefit to the natural environment? Is the process reasonable from a cost-benefit perspective? And where are they helpful? Where are they not? And what are the alternative tools? We don't have a ton of time, so I won't really belabor this slide. This is sort of the methods that were developed. But the important point is that we collectively developed a statement of work with RDOS, the province, ECCC, sent it out for bids, and ultimately Stantec was retained to do this analysis. And again, RDOS staff very helpfully provided 236 permits for the last 5 years, of which Stantec was able to review 131 in detail. Stantec also sent surveys to 50 landowners and 30 QP consultants who were familiar with the process. Further, they reviewed other existing ESDPs used amongst local governments in BC, and from those 4 pieces, they developed suggestions and answers in relation to the 5 questions that we posed. So what were the key results and conclusions? This is why we're here. So the board will have access to the full report, and I highly recommend reading it. What you'll see in the next few slides are the highlights as the Federal Wildlife Service sees them to these 5 questions. So the first question, are these tools effective at mitigating impacts of development? The answer, unfortunately, after 5 years and 236 permit, the consultant was unable to come up with an answer. Because there is no follow-up monitoring, we don't know if the recommendations in those reports or permit conditions were ever followed. Essentially, there needs to be a process to put boots on the ground to understand if these things work. In addition, the QPs that responded indicated that there sometimes was a lack of clarity about whether to use the rapid assessment tool versus the full tool, and that this could have impacts on the outcomes on the ground. One of the potential hindrances is that the QPs are under contract to the landowner, not to the RDOS. So the QPs basically make non-binding, unenforceable recommendations, and there's no way to know if they're followed. Some of the QPs themselves said that they didn't know if the recommendations in their reports were ever followed through on. Questions 2 and 3 are combined here to save a little bit of time, but essentially the questions of, are they having a measurable benefit, and is it reasonable from a cost-benefit perspective? The answer to the first question, again, is essentially unknown because there's no monitoring. There's a lack of monitoring. There's a lack of enforcement. Having said that, Stantec felt that 69% of the permits they reviewed were deemed necessary based on the presence of sensitive features on those properties. That most reports and permits had recommendations made by the QPs specifically indicating areas within those properties that should be conserved. But again, we have no way of knowing if they actually were. So there's no way to assess if there is a measurable benefit. And I mean, this is a problem throughout environmental planning and environmental monitoring. It's easy to measure costs. It's hard to measure the benefit of something staying the same from a more philosophical perspective. Having said all of that, Stantec did conclude that basically a third of the permits, 31% of the permits they evaluated, appeared to be completely unnecessary. So that represents a really big burden on your ratepayers, those landowners who are paying for those reports, and on RDOS staff. Where are ESDPs helpful and where are they ineffective? So Stantec concluded that ESDPs are useful for helping to guide development in areas where sensitive features do occur. Obviously, these tools are most helpful at the zoning and subdivision level, but they are still helpful at that individual lot level because, again, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where trees are felled. That's where the important attributes of critical habitat for endangered species may be lost. Stantec also, however, highlighted, and we have had this discussion many times with your very knowledgeable staff, that there are very serious legal constraints here and some murky legal ground. The authority of local governments to monitor and enforce these permits is somewhat uncertain. The Union of BC Municipalities and the province disagree on this, the province believing that municipalities already have this authority. However, there are few tests and there's little case law. So the enabling legislation is a problem here, and it's uncertain. Having said that, local governments across BC seem to vary in the level of political support and capacity for doing monitoring and enforcement. In other words, different RDs take different approaches to their risk assessment in doing so. And an example provided, RDCO and RDNO have monitored, enforced, and issued fines under these permits. Other municipalities have refused permits altogether, although that's potentially more questionable and there's no case law to back it up. And the final question was, are there alternatives to the proposed amendments that could be effective? The answer is essentially yes. The Stantec report provides a suite of options, all of which are non-binding and presented as suggestions, but I would highly recommend the board review them in detail. ECCC's suggested approach is essentially to amend your bylaws to refine rather than remove the DP portion, the building clearing of lots portion of this bylaw. Provide exemptions so that you can prevent these unnecessary permits and the unnecessary red tape. Hire additional staff to conduct pre-screening to reduce these unneeded permits, and conduct monitoring and enforcement so that we can understand if there are measurable benefits and results. At this point, the consultant was unable to basically say for the most part if there was, and that's strictly because there's no follow-up. Obviously, updating the mapping and the guidance is a constant need. Mapping changes, resolution changes, that's a burden that requires staff, that requires resources, but it's a recommendation. Another recommendation was to consider harmonizing these ESDP bylaws, policies, and procedures with other RDs in the valley to provide better clarity and consistency for the landowners, the QPs, and the planners. QPs consistently spoke to us about this, both, and that's mentioned within the Stantec report and has been mentioned separately, that it would be highly beneficial if the processes and procedures were similar up and down the valley. Understanding, of course, that different districts have different challenges. And apologies for this last bullet point here. There's a typo, but basically to incorporate more detailed mapping into the official community plans to protect wildlife connectivity and corridors, etc. So returning to this slide, and why is ECCC taking an interest? Well, we'd like to bring the focus back to the unusual responsibility that RDOS is placed under by the preponderance of species at risk and critical habitat within your jurisdiction. We understand this challenge. There is, however, a potential risk that we think the committee and the board should be aware of when you deliberate these bylaw amendments. And I want to approach this delicately, but frankly. The National Accord for Species at Risk, this is some background, but I think it's important. The National Accord for Species at Risk actually predates the Act, and it was heavily influenced by local and provincial governments who petitioned for a stewardship first approach. That is that basically voluntary actions and good conservation on the ground should come first, and that local and provincial governments should have the flexibility to apply their own tools within their own jurisdictions, and essentially the feds should stick to their own jurisdiction. This was ultimately embraced by the federal legislation with an important caveat. There's a safety net clause in the Species at Risk Act that allows federal legislation to override other instruments if they're deemed to not adequately protect a species that is at imminent risk of disappearing from Canadian soil. You're probably already aware of this instrument, but it's known as an emergency order, and it's enabled under Section 80 of SARA. Essentially, it is a regulatory tool that allows the federal government to prohibit any activity that poses an imminent threat to a species or its habitat. The petition generally comes from a member of the public or an NGO, not from within the Wildlife Service itself. But when that petition is received, the Wildlife Service assesses the data, makes recommendations. The minister basically must follow that recommendation. If the data concludes that a species is at imminent risk of disappearing from Canada, the minister must recommend an emergency order. At that point, GIC, the Government Council, essentially cabinet, has the discretion to make the order or not, but it's at the whim of politics. And the important point here is, if it happens, activities that are seen as threats to species at risk and species at risk habitat within the designated area cannot happen without a federal permit. And that could include subdivision, construction, building of houses, etc., even on private land. One of the key questions that is looked at when an emergency order petition is made is whether the local and provincial instruments adequately already protect that species. It's a tool that has not been used a ton yet, but as examples, emergency orders have been passed in the city of Montreal and Longueuil, where developers on private land must now submit permit applications to CWS to clear lots and build houses. Similarly, in Southeast Alberta and Southwest Saskatchewan, prohibitions apply to oil and gas activities on provincial crown lands and other activities that are restricting and have economic impacts. Other petitions for emergency orders are in place, including in BC, most notably mountain caribou, spotted owls. However, if that all sounds scary, I want to return you to the concept of stewardship and cooperation first. So to illustrate this, that we try to put our money where our mouth is, I represent the stewardship unit of the Wildlife Service. We see ourselves as the carrot, not the stick. In the past 10 years, we've invested more than $11 million with partners within the RDOS boundaries to prop up these species and prevent this from happening. This is an investment directly to all these partners you see here, among others, to promote conservation of these species, to keep everything going well. We support stewardship first. We support local and provincial governments using their own tools first. And as noted previously, we continue to extend an offer to support RDOS in its implementation of enhanced ESDP bylaws, should the board conclude to pursue this approach. And that is the end of the presentation that we have for you today. I'll happily take questions.
Thank you, sir. I'm just wondering whether we should let Jamie do her presentation next and then take questions as a totality, if you will.
Sure, that'd be great.
That'd be
Thank you.
good for me.
Would you care to do your part, please?
Thank you. And I'm just going to take a second to introduce Celine Davis, who is here also from the province. Just there she is. Go ahead, Celine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Apologies for being late. I had some technological issues this morning. So Celine Davis, I'm Executive Director of the Ecosystems Branch in our Land Use Policy Planning and Ecosystems Division in our Water, Land and Resource Stewardship Ministry. All this to just give you a sense that the province is definitely, and you'll hear a little bit from concrete example from Jamie, but we are actively working right now on a number of different initiatives to support better stewardship of land and water resources in BC. You're familiar with a number of them, but and I think some of you might have heard that we're developing biodiversity and ecosystem health framework. Through all of that work, what I'd like to stress is the impetus to really look at how to be resilient, and to be resilient communities means that ecosystem health is important, and the province is recognizing that needs to be done in partnership, of course, with First Nations, but also local communities, recognizing how important it is to work with all of you to help and provide some different tools. And so we'll have more information on that coming up in the next couple of months. But I just wanted to let you know that definitely there's support. There's definitely, and you'll see that, and I know Jamie's been working very closely with regional districts. So I'll pass it over to Jamie, and happy if there's additional questions at the end to provide some responses.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you. And actually, Francisco, are you able to, Danny, sorry, are you able to share my slides from there that I had sent?
Yes, I can have those shared.
Great, because then I can see my notes.
Okay.
Will I see them when they come up? Oh, awesome. Okay. Super exciting slides. Okay, so I live and work in Penticton, and I just thought I would tie up some of the things that Todd provided. And as Celine mentioned, I have worked a fair bit with the regional district. We used to actually help review development permits that were reviewed to us. We don't have the staff to do that right now, but I'm arguing to try and get us back in that game, because I think it sometimes was beneficial to have the province comment on something just in terms of trying to push back on development in some cases. Let me just find my notes again. I'm actually on vacation right now, but I came to the meeting because this is an important issue. So as the board, as when you're later today voting on whether or not to retain, building and just general development as a trigger for ESDPs, not just subdivisions, we've sort of made the argument that it is very useful at the zoning and subdivision stage. It's my understanding that there's no trigger at zoning, but that staff can request an environmental assessment at that point. But as Todd alluded to, the rubber hitting the road at the stage of actual clearing or house placement or things like that. It's just it's sort of the last time you have say over what I'm terming here your green infrastructure. So as Celine mentioned, creating resilient communities, we all know that floods and drought and fire are becoming more frequent. And one of the RDOS's best tools against, or one of your best investments in that is green infrastructure. So that refers to wetlands and just general vegetation that mostly affects the water cycle. So any vegetation that's there is going to absorb water in those crazy rainstorms that we get sometimes, and going to slow down how fast it runs off the landscape, potentially mitigating floods. And it also discharges the water more slowly than, for instance, a gravel road or parking lot or roads. And so then you can have some potential drought mitigation. So vegetation in wetted areas are important to have that last look at when you're doing an ESDP at the development stage. So since 2017, when you brought in ESDPs at the building stage, the majority of the ESDPs that you're getting are from development, not from subdivision. So if you take away those, there's a chunk of things you're not having oversight on. And I'm arguing that you want to have oversight on those. Let's see, I think I have an actual, yeah, so this is just basic slide to say that to keep ESDPs at the time of building, you're getting a little more assurance that you're having a say over that green infrastructure and someone's not just coming in and bulldozing the entire lot.
I think she's already moved on.
And another thing that I was going to say, so a lot of subdivision has already happened and a lot of zoning has already happened, but a lot of lots are quite large and are on sensitive habitat, or as you know, much of the RDOS is mapped as sensitive habitat. But having that last look at, okay, are they going to put the house next to the snake den, or having a biologist go in there and help them know what a good design is and where a good placement is quite useful. We have I have a concrete example from the RDOS a few years ago where somebody was putting in a development on a completely undeveloped lot, and it wasn't completely undeveloped. It had a partial access road. And so they wanted to build a whole new access road to their building site. And through review by the biologists that were working on it, they were convinced to not make an entirely new access road and to just extend the existing access road. So that's just a concrete example of how at the time of building, you could have a say on clearing of trees or clearing of sensitive habitat or not, and you can minimize impacts. I think my next slide, can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, is that the next slide? Can you go to a different slide? Can you go forward one and see what we get?
That's the last slide I have.
There was only 2 slides.
There were 4 slides.
Oh, can we go? Yeah. Okay, that's one. So just for context, all of the other major jurisdictions in the Okanagan Valley have ESDP at the building stage. This certainly isn't to say that you should do what everybody else is doing just for that fact, but this gives you a sense of the context. And I know that the RDOS is quite unique and it's huge and has a huge land base and has that overwhelming responsibility for the species at risk there. But just to note that every other jurisdiction has it and that they're working on how to make it better, and they face obviously some of the same challenges that RDOS has faced. And I guess my message here is that it's really worth speaking to them and seeing how they're addressing these challenges. So like especially RDCO and RDNO, they're the ones that have actually been ticketing for non-compliance with a development permit bylaw. So they have a bylaw officer go out and say, hey, did they put the house where they said they were going to put it? And did they, retain that tree, or did they restore X area with native plants, etc.? And if they didn't comply with that, then they are ticketed. And so that's just one of the tools. And again, I would argue that having discussions with those other regional districts could be very helpful because they're dealing with some of the same things that you are. And just knowing that all of these other jurisdictions do have ESDP at the building stage just gives you a sense of the importance of the ESDP as a tool. Okay, let's try another slide. Yeah, so the Stantec report is long and has a lot of suggestions. As the board, I believe that you have to decide whether to accept the report and what to do with it, basically. The province's suggestions would be to accept the Stantec report and specifically act on the following recommendations. So as Todd mentioned, reducing that 30% unnecessary ESDPs through exemptions, for example, for lots that are already totally cleared and gravel, or for putting on a deck or putting in a pool in a sort of already developed area. And then that other tool of pre-screening applications. So I know, for instance, the city of Kelowna has a biologist on staff or an environmental planner type on staff that will pre-screen and say, no, they don't actually need a development permit for this. The other recommendation, and I think this is probably the most helpful, is to talk to the other regional districts about their successes and challenges with the ESDP at this stage and how they're doing monitoring and enforcement, such as ticketing. And another thing I'll add is that the OCCP, which I call it's like the SOSCP of the North, so their conservation program, is working with RDCO and RDNO on harmonizing the way that they do ESDPs, and I actually asked, and they're willing, or they're interested in having RDOS join that conversation if staff are able. And then to that point, addressing staff capacity, Environment Canada and it has offered some funding, and then just, I'm not sure if you all know, but the South Okanagan-Similkameen Conservation Program, SOSCP, is now back online, and we have a new program director. And she's wonderful and personable and easy to get along with, and is looking forward to reimagining how the SOSCP could support the RDOS. I know it's been a little bit contentious in the past in some cases, and the shared planner was a difficult role, but all of the local governments in the South Okanagan have expressed that they would like something similar or some kind of support that the SOSCP could provide for reviewing, even for reviewing at the OCP level. So that's just an offer of support there. And then I think that last slide, please, Danny. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is just what I said. This is just a summary of it. And just to know that the other regional districts are keen to share their processes with RDOS, because it is a tricky position that you're all in, and I'm sure it's a bit annoying that federal and provincial governments are coming to your meeting and telling you that it's your responsibility when I understand that it is also our responsibility. But yeah, the ESDP is a tool that you currently have, and that has been quite successful in some other jurisdictions. So before you make the decision to reduce it, I think we all think that it's worth at least speaking with the other regional districts and seeing how they're doing it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jamie. Are there any questions for our delegates here? Director Federico.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the presentation. As a newly elected official, it's great to learn about this. However, I'm in an area where the ESDPs have been a significant challenge. We have a few big developments that have just come in and clear cut the sides of the hill without, most residents are feeling without due cause to understanding the ecosystem. So with a professional reliance model, which is what we've got a QEP that is known throughout the region for just signing off on whatever a developer wants. So what is a way that we can kind of combat against a QEP who will just create a document because they're being paid by the developer and will just do what they want to do? Thank you.
Yes, I think I know your area. And are you the director of Naramata?
I am, yes.
Yes. So and Chris can chime in on this too, but I would argue that in the past, when we had a biologist, a shared biologist from the SOSCP, there was a little bit more ability to push back. And I would agree that the professional reliance model is difficult and flawed, because it puts QEPs in the position of they're kind of in between their professional guidance and their client. So yeah, to me, the answer to that is having an environmental person on staff. And if that's not possible, having a shared environmental person, and then looping in, this is my job to do, is to try and work on getting my office to start reviewing big developments like that again. Does that help at all?
Thank you, Jamie. Director Guttins, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just have a question about the history of the shared biologist role. And I'm sorry, I'm just going through my notes here. So because I think that was around for quite some time. And I think that the RDOS paid about $10,000 and the SOSCP raised about $60,000. And then the contract was terminated, I believe, from the biologist in 2020. why haven't we replaced that role? Is it the funding from the SOS side, or like why isn't that?
I can speak to that. It's because the SOSCP went into hiatus. We had Bryn left, as you know,
Yeah.
and then we had one program. I'm currently the chair of the SOSCP. I should have said that, mostly because somebody needed to take it up. We had a director after Bryn who was really good at some things, but not the best with people, maybe. And I know the RDOS had some challenges with her. And so we didn't renew her contract. And then we took a minute to see if there was still appetite for the SOSCP. And there was, and it took a few years to get funding together and get people together to be the executive to hire a new person. So she has just started. Her name is Lindray. She just started on June 1st, and I know that she's already spoken to Chris and indeed the other the other local governments in the South Okanagan about how to get somebody back in a similar role if that role didn't work, but to have a biologist, because none of the local governments in the South Okanagan actually have their own environmental planner. So that was filling that role, and so we're hoping to fill that role very soon again.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, Chair, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So I would like to explore that further. I think just exactly what Director Rodrigo said about the QEP model, and you know, when we have this area, and we are in a large area with a small population, and we do have this responsibility of having, I think it's the most species and ecosystems at risk in all of Canada. I think that is such a worthy goal of protecting, and it is what makes our area unique and what does attract people being here. And I believe that citizens would be willing to support us taking care of that part of Canada in this way. So I would like to explore that more. And if I understand correctly from your slides, the other municipalities within the regional district, the Okanagan and Similkameen, have indicated that they are interested in sharing this role somehow. So I think there's a way of working forward. So I really appreciated the report, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Director Gettens. I'll take CAO Newell first, then Mr. Kemper, and Director Blumfeld.
Just a reminder, Mr. Chair, that our next delegation was scheduled for 9:30. We do have this issue on your board agenda later on today for the board to discuss.
Thank you, sir. Yes, okay. Mr. Kemper, can you make a quick comment, and then we'll go to Director Blumfeld.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to Director Gettens and again reiterate that Environment Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Service, is interested in helping to support financially such a position, whether it's through SOSCP or directly with the RDOS. We feel very strongly that having local biologists on staff would help deal with a lot of these issues, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Director Blumfeld.
Oh, hi. Thank you, everybody. I thought the province was doing an upgrade to the QEP process and sort of revamping it and bringing in some more regulations in that. Can you just sort of comment on that and see where we're at, see where the province is at on that?
To whoever, quickly, please.
I'm not aware of that process right now. Maybe Celine is.
Director Gettens.
Thanks, Chair. Just really quickly, I'm a bit frustrated that we weren't given enough time to discuss this. I think it's really important, and we've got a panel full of experts in the room to ask questions. So feeling rushed along on this, I think, is an unfortunate miss. And I don't know if anyone's available from the panel here to come back when we discuss this at the board meeting, but I think there'll be questions that we will need help answering, and this is the crew that should be there.
Thank you, Director Gettens. I'm not sure that that's a proper procedure. CO Newell?
Yes?
Is that a proper procedure?
Well, I mean, the board can invite delegates to attend at any time with a resolution, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Would any of the delegates care to volunteer for this later?
Time will it be at?
CO Newell, please.
I don't know.
Be sometime after 11:30.
I'm able to join by phone. I'm on a ferry at 12:10 until 12:40.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to work. All right, then.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, like probably the best approach would be if you wanted to defer this later on and bring a delegation back, but to arrange it at this point would be difficult.
Thank you, sir. Is there a motion in that direction? Director Gattens, is there a seconder? Director Fedrigo, all in favor? Any opposed?
Comment before
Yes,
you vote.
please. Yes, I didn't ask.
Sorry, this is Director Conant. Just wanted to know whether there's a possibility that we could have some of these delegates in person when we have them in again. Yeah.
Yes, when I'm not on vacation, I can definitely come in person.
Thank you. Director Pendergraft.
Yeah, my one question is, and my preference would be also to have the Stantec available to answer questions, since they were the ones that actually did the study. I think it's important that they're here as well, because they're the ones that I really have questions for in the process.
Are you suggesting an amendment to the motion?
Yeah, I would really prefer that they are a part of it.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconder, Director McCardoff. Director Monteith, or discussion?
Yeah, through the chair. I seem to recall the conversation was when the province was here and asked us to postpone while we went through this. Benchmarking with other regional districts was a request of ours. Was that not true? That was part of the conversation. So I kind of feel let down that wasn't part of this sort of presentation, that we didn't hear what other regional districts were doing and how we would fit in better, and what we're doing is best practice versus theirs, all that sort of stuff. So I kind of feel like we're missing a large part of what I was hoping to have today. Thank you.
I'll take that as a comment. Mr. Kemper.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to note in regards to the question of Stantec's availability, they were unavailable today to attend voluntarily. They're no longer under contract to Environment Canada, so it would require probably a separate financial contribution to get them here in person.
Blaster.
Director Gattens, please.
Thank you. Listen, I think this is too important of a conversation, and we've gone this far down the path, and we're about to make a pretty significant decision on where we go next. So I think we need to take a pause on this. We've already said to defer it. I think that we need to go back to whoever's building the agenda and making sure we have enough time with the right people in the audience or the right people on the panel to have the conversation. And it's just frustrating to have a half a conversation and then go to a board meeting and expect to make a decision on it.
Thank you. Any other comments on the amendment? Let's raise the question on the amendment to the motion. All in favor? If opposed? Seeing none, amendment passes. Any further discussion on the motion to defer? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Yeah. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Looking for a motion to come out of planning and development. Motion, Director Pendergraft, seconder, Director Holmes. Fair enough. Thank you. Back to the chair.
And thank you, Director Knodel. Our next committee meeting is the Protective Services, and I am going to go to Director Roberts for that, if he's online.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Good. I have a motion to approve the agenda, Protective Services, at 9:49. I see Director Knodel, and I have a seconder. Yep. All in favor? Thank you. I'm going to pass this over to the CAO, to the delegation coming in regards to the Program Act modernization.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Chair Pendergraft had reported earlier on this year that we had a presentation at the Chair CAO Forum in Victoria, and that it was very interesting. And of course, the Emergency Program Act modernization is, continues. We had thought it was going into the House in the spring, didn't make it. There has been a recent update, a new framework just came out. So this is quite appropriate that we have a delegation from the province that can give us an update on the Emergency Program Act modernization. So we should just turn that over to the delegation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Could we now have, I believe it's Mr. Hawley leading the are you leading the delegation?
Yes, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
Thumbs up.
Thank you. Super. Hello, everyone. My name is Grant Hawley. I'm the Executive Lead of Policy, Legislation, and Engagement at Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. With me are Andrew Morrison, who is a Senior Regional Manager for EMCR based out of Kamloops. I'm hoping he's on the line. I can't see him, but I'm told he's here. And as well, oh, there's Andrew, super. And as well, Megan Vukolich, who is a Senior Policy Analyst focused on the local authorities regulation. She's based out of Victoria, like me. We're grateful for this opportunity, and we're calling in from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I understand that we have about 15 minutes to kind of run through some slides and questions, and then some questions and answers. So perhaps for the sake of time, I'll pass the mic to Megan, who will run through some slides, and then we're happy to go to Q's and A's.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so grateful to be joining you all from my home on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, or more specifically, my basement stairwell. I'm just going to quickly share my screen with you folks. Okay, I won't be able to see you, so I'm going to assume that all systems are go unless I hear otherwise. But I'm happy to give you all an update on the modernized legislation that is going to be coming forward in the fall of this year. In my very quick presentation, I'm going to give you an update. I'm going to go through what you can expect to see for local governments coming forth in the modernized legislation. I'm going to go through what implementation is intended to look like and go through some of the regulatory timelines and plans that we have going forward, as well as highlight some of what EMCR's priority work will be for summer and fall of 2023. So just as an initial update, EMCR has finalized and approved the draft legislation. As was noted earlier, the legislation was intended to come forward in the spring, but something that we've heard from our partners is just the need to fully understand what the legislation is going to look like before it comes forward. So that is why it is going to be tabled in fall of 2023, and we'll provide updates as we can on when exactly that it will be. Moving forward, we're really going to be focusing on two main things over the course of the rest of 2023. And those two things are focusing on developing a common understanding of the legislation, which is where we are at right now in the summer, as well as developing the regulations. And I'll get into a little bit more detail going forward on really what that means. And also we're going to be developing many more robust opportunities for engagement between EMCR and local governments. Something that we heard at the CAO conference in the spring in Victoria was that there really needs to be more detailed and robust engagement with elected officials, CAOs, and practitioners. So that's something that we're really building into our process going forward. And I'll highlight exactly what that means in a little bit. So very quickly at a high level, I'd like to share with you what's going to be new for local authorities in the modernized legislation. Again, this is going to be at a 5,000-foot level. There's obviously a lot more detail and nuance. At the end of the presentation, I'll share with you how to get in contact with me and other folks on our team if you have more questions, as well as where you can get more information on all of this and more. So three new things for local governments that are going to be available upon royal assent. So this means that the day that the new act becomes law, you're going to have access to these things. The first is multi-jurisdictional emergency management organizations. If you've heard me or others speak on the legislation before, we affectionately call these MJEMOs or MJEMOs. Essentially, this is the act catching up to things that local governments are already doing to collaborate and ensure that emergency management practices happen across jurisdictions. So local authorities will be able to establish or join a multi-jurisdictional emergency management organization that can include any combination of local authorities, First Nations, and the province. Essentially, a lot of these organizations or things that approximate them already exist. Central Okanagan Regional District is a really good example of such a collaborative practice. But what the legislation is trying to do here is recognize these practices and make them easier in a legislative sense. So a new or expanded requirement rather in the legislation is going to be risk assessments for local governments, which I'll touch on momentarily. And under the new legislation, anyone in an MJEMO will be able to complete this requirement collaboratively. So let's say that North Vancouver and the City of Vancouver joined an MJEMO together, they would have to do one risk assessment. We're intending this to be a choose your own adventure model to recognize the multitude of contexts across British Columbia. So this can mean that you can complete all operational and legislative requirements together, or you can choose to set up an MJEMO for a very specific requirement. As long as all things are achieved with some combination of an MJEMO or your own emergency management organization, the requirements of the legislation will be considered met. There'll be more details coming forth in the regulation as we develop that and subsequent policy and guidance, but this is a framework that we've built in just to make that collaboration a little bit easier. Something else that's going to be new is we've extended states of local emergency as well as states of provincial emergency from 7 days to 14 days. The reason we've done this is we've heard very loud and clear that 7 days just isn't enough. And the way that emergencies have evolved and the way that we experience them has evolved in BC, we need more time. And it's an administrative burden for local governments to consistently be extending states of local emergency. So that is something that you'll have access to immediately upon royal assent. The third new element or tool of the legislation is recovery periods and associated powers. What this means is that there is going to be a new period that really bridges response and recovery. These are going to last 90 days. And the intention here is to give local governments access to certain powers that they would have during a state of local emergency post-emergency, so that parts of your communities or certain areas can start to move into that recovery process while having access to certain powers. So this comes from lessons learned from areas such as the sinkholes in Seasheld or the Lytton fires, where communities are able to start to rebuild, but they might still need the power to restrict access to certain roadways or prevent certain individuals from re-entering their homes because there might be an unsafe area, but there doesn't need to continuously be a state of emergency. We've heard from communities that it can be very challenging to continuously extend states of emergency for large periods of time. So this is intended to really change how we approach the recovery process. I'm going to get in now to what some of the new and expanded responsibilities are for regulated entities. And in our definition of regulated entity in the modernized legislation, that'll include local authorities. So all of the new responsibilities I'm going to get into here don't just apply to yourselves, they'll also apply to ministries, the province, critical infrastructure owners and operators, and public sector agencies. So for example, EMCR will be required to do all of the same things that you will be hearing here and more. And these will be implemented in a phased approach, which means that these requirements won't be enforced the day that the legislation comes into effect. They're going to be implemented with the local authority emergency management regulation, which I'll get to in a little bit. But essentially, we're intending in staging how these new requirements are implemented and when they'll be required to be complete. So risk assessments and business continuity plans under the existing EPA exist in the local authority emergency management regulation as requirements of emergency management plans. We're moving these two aspects to the modernized legislation and formally codifying them. What that means is they're going to be formal requirements But the local authority emergency management regulation will provide opportunity to provide further detail and clarity. Something that we've heard very vocally from practitioners is there needs to be a little bit more clarity on when certain powers and when certain responsibilities are in effect, and when they know that they've met those responsibilities. So that's something that we're intending to clarify through the regulatory process. Something that's going to be new for both risk assessments and emergency management plans is the consideration of climate change, Indigenous and local knowledge, as well as attention to what we're calling in the legislation intersectional disadvantage. And what that really means is understanding that there are certain communities and certain emergencies that are going to need a little bit extra help to be as resilient as other factions of the community. So risk assessments are going to need to identify these risks and all of this information, and then emergency management plans are going to need to action them. We've left this fairly broad in the legislation, and we're going to be providing further detail potentially either in regulations or in subsequent guidance documents and further policy. Consultation and cooperation is also a new requirement under the legislation that will apply to all regulated entities, as I just noticed, or as I just noted. This aligns with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Local authorities will need to consult and cooperate with Indigenous governing bodies when developing risk assessments, emergency management plans, and before undertaking land-based emergency measures. The term Indigenous governing body, or IGB, will essentially be self-elected, and what that means is First Nations will be able to self-identify who their Indigenous governing body is, or who is able to make decisions on behalf of the nation. This will have to be done in ongoing conversations between the province and local authorities and IGBs, and will really be an evolving process over time. What it means to consult and cooperate is not defined in the legislation, and this is something we're hoping to define in community through conversations. This is going to look completely different in certain contexts, and we would just really want to allow this process to unfold naturally and with the support of guidance provided by the province. I'm going to move on to implementation and the regulations, but first I want to focus on that phase approach that I mentioned earlier. So the new legislation isn't going to come into force all at once, and certain aspects are going to be ready for implementation immediately. So those three powers that I highlighted, those are going to be ready for you right away, but others are going to be brought into force with the regulations. And I just want to highlight for you kind of what the whole legislative package really looks like. So at the top of the pyramid here, we have the Act, which is going to be replacing the EPA. And that really sets the overall intention, those requirements, powers at a very high level. The regulation then deep dives into kind of what those specific details for those things will be. Policy provides even further detail and really outlines how to execute certain responsibilities. And then operational plans and procedures, guidance documents, and templates really kind of animate all of those things and show you how to do them. An example or a metaphor that I like to use is of pie. Let's say there was legislation that said all families in British Columbia need to make pie. That's our act. We have our high-level goal that really explains what we need to do. Then the regulation gives us some more detail. It might say that grandmothers need to make pie for their grandchildren every Thursday. That gives us a little bit more detail on how to execute the act. Policy might be where to get certain ingredients, or it might include recipes. And then plans and procedures might include best practices for sourcing the freshest ingredients for pie. So all of these things working together are the broader legislative package. We understand that all of those things, like the recipes, the more granular things, are needed by communities to implement the rest of the act. So this is going to be an evolving process. Kind of see the legislation as a goal to be reached, and all of these things are going to help us all reach this goal. So because of that, all of the requirements are going to be phased in, so that as we develop these policies and procedures, they'll be available to communities to implement the regulations in the Act. I have here on the screen our regulatory plan. We're going to be depositing 2 regulations with the modernized legislation in the fall. And those are the two that you see at the top of the screen there, the general regulation and the ministries regulation. And these are going to, I'm not going to get into the details of every single reg here, but the ministries regulation essentially details government and ministry responsibilities and provides a little bit more detail for them. And then the general regulation is going to address technical matters necessary for the legislation to function. I'm going to highlight here the local authority regulation because that's most important to you folks. We're going to be really beginning the development of this now into the end of 2023. And essentially this regulation is going to detail some of the responsibilities for local governments, provide some of that more specific standards that I mentioned earlier. Our target for this regulation is spring, summer of 2024. So what this means is the regulation and the related requirements for local governments won't be in effect till this time, and we're likely going to be building in what I'll refer to as a grace period for local governments. So there'll be detail in the regulation on when those specific requirements need to be completed. The reason I'm highlighting this so many times is I really want to alleviate any anxiety that in fall of 2023, local governments need to have all these new things completed. We understand that this is going to take time and it's going to take guidance and more resources in terms of policy from the province. So this is something that we're going to be working into how the phasing works. The second regulation that I want to highlight is the compensation and disaster financial assistance regulation. This is going through its own modernization project that is going to change the way the program works. There's also going to be engagement on that, which I'll highlight in a little bit, but this also has a similar timeline. Two other regulatory areas are critical infrastructure and compliance and enforcement, which are pretty self-explanatory, and it's going to provide further details with that also have a similar timeline to the local authority regulation. So all of this work is ongoing, and we'll be providing updates as the year progresses. I'm just going to quickly highlight what our priority work is for this summer. So this week, we've released a technical paper. This is available on our website. And essentially, a technical paper is a deep dive on the legislation. It is an explainer, and many of the questions you have will likely be answered in this technical paper. Of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, but the intention of this paper is really to explain and create a common understanding of not only what the intentions of the legislation are, but really what they're going to mean in practice. We're also in the process of co-hosting webinars with the BC Association of Emergency Managers, specifically targeted for local government practitioners on key areas of the modernized legislation. So we had our first one last night and our second one this morning, which were overview presentations. And throughout the course of the summer, we're going to be having more on specific areas of the legislation. One of them being consultation and cooperation, as we know many folks have questions on that. If you are interested in attending one of these webinars, they are free to access, and details are available on the BCAEM website. So feel free to register for any of those. We're also in the process of planning for the implementation of the Act. So we're going to be doing some broad engagement to ensure just understanding of the legislation through these webinars, through some targeted engagement that we're in the process of planning. And we're really just intending to gather feedback on the supports needed for local governments to implement, but also just trying to develop that understanding of what is coming forward and making sure everyone is armed with the information that they need to be successful in implementation. Moving into fall of 2023, there's going to be two main discussion papers that are relevant to you folks that are going to be released in September prior to UBCM convention. The local authority regulation is going to have one paper, and the disaster financial assistance regulation is going to have another paper. These two are going to outline essentially what can be in the regulation for each of these two areas and what kind of policy things that EMCR is proposing. We're also going to be outlining a process for formal feedback from local governments. So essentially, there's going to be approximately a 3-month period where you'll be invited to provide written feedback. And this feedback is going to directly form what the regulation is going to look like. We're going to be using this feedback. We're going to be analyzing it to ensure that the regulation reflects the lived experiences of local governments. We're also going to be having an engagement period that coincides with the feedback period. We're going to be doing targeted engagement in particular areas of the province, and we're also going to be likely hosting virtual engagement. Details on that will be forthcoming as we continue to plan them, and this will likely be available on our website, but we will make sure that this information is available to you as it becomes available. With that, this is some information here on how to get in touch with our team at Policy and Legislation. This email here goes directly to myself and to Grant. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email them and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Our website there is where you can find the technical paper that I just mentioned. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very well stated. Do we have any questions for the panel? Knowing time is of the essence. Director Knodel.
Can I just make sure that her contact information is copyable? I couldn't get it off the screen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Malden, is that something that you can make sure that we have access to?
Yes.
Just double checking if I'm not missing anybody else. Any hands, any questions?
Director Holmes has a hand waving.
Okay, thanks. Your hand was behind another screen. Sorry, I missed it. Director Holmes.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Just a question. It seems to be that there's some pretty big expectations on local governments to engage with Indigenous communities in the middle of an emergency, which is great in principle. I'm just wondering about how it works. It's going to work in practice. It was mentioned that you're kind of going to let it unfold naturally, I think, what the words were, and with some guidance provided by the province. That kind of sentence kind of scares me a little bit, and I'm so specifically, I'm just wondering, will there be any support from the province to help develop that kind of collaboration, both for local governments and the Indigenous government body, which I presume would be a band council? I'm not sure. That's another question. But I'm just wondering, how is this going to work in practice?
Thank you so much. That's a great question. I'll start the answer, and then Grant, please feel free to tap in if you have anything else to add. I'll start first with the piece on support. So EMCR is in the process of starting engagement between both Indigenous governing bodies and First Nations and local governments. We had a session in Kamloops in the spring, which was kind of our inaugural event, to start having those discussions about what these requirements are going to look like in practice and what supports are going to be needed from EMCR and writ large in order to make this happen. Something that is going to be new in the modernized legislation that I really didn't get a chance to touch on, but is in that technical paper, if you have any specific questions on it, is an agreements framework. And this framework is going to support the implementation of these engagement requirements. For example, a local government and a First Nation will be able to detail in an agreement what that looks like to engage, but also what certain elements of response or recovery will need to look like between communities. This isn't a requirement to have agreements, but it will be something that will support the implementation of these engagement requirements should they be needed by communities. So this is going to be what I mean by unfolding naturally, or like an ongoing process, is really that this is going to be something that's going to develop over time, but the province is heavily involved in creating specific materials to support this and provide guidance to local governments as well as to First Nations on what this will mean. We just want to make sure that we're not too finely detailing what exactly that is going to be, because it's going to be so different for communities from one to another, and that's why the legislation doesn't define what it means. But through guidance materials and through policy, that's where that detail is going to come through. So as we move through the regulatory development process, I'm really happy to hear these questions because that's something we're going to take with us as we go into the drafting process and as we develop that policy. maybe I'll leave a beat for Grant if you want to add anything.
Thank you. Yeah, so the event in Kamloops, which took place back in March, I believe, brought together over 40 folks from Indigenous.
Oh, we've lost you. You've got yourself or muted.
Sorry,
Thank
it keeps okay, sorry. I don't know how I did that. Yeah, so the event in Kamloops brought together over 50 folks, a combination of local government staff as well as First Nations staff. The whole purpose was to think through how do we operationalize the consultation and cooperation requirements with Indigenous governing bodies. So there is a guidance document that is being developed. It's quite exhaustive. It will be shared back with this group, the Kamloops group, in the very near future, and then made more widely available, obviously, through our website and through and shared with all partners. So hopefully it will help operationalize what consultation and cooperation looks like with Indigenous governing bodies. And as well, government is interested in understanding kind of what other supports, including financial supports, are required by local governments. So that is top of mind and something that is on our minister's radar.
All right, thank you. Does that that's quite a lot. It's interesting. We're definitely going to be on pins and needles waiting to hear that specifics. Do I see any other hands? If I'm missing any, I apologize. I have some questions in regards to the MJEMO, but as being given your access information, I will direct my questions to you specifically as it relates to some of the motions that we've made recently. Again, if there is nobody else with any information, I'd just like to thank the panel for bringing this information to us. It's very helpful. And could I see a motion to decease and the protective services? Director Knodel, I see a seconder. All in favor? Thank you. I'm going to pass this back to the chair.
Thank you, Director Roberts. We are now into corporate services, and that's myself. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. We've got the two items on the agenda at the moment. Appointment of officers for discussion purposes. CAO.
Yeah, so both of C is sort of two separate issues. Mr. Chair, committee had previously requested an update on sort of the connectivity field and then also the RDOS website. So Mr. Francisco is going to report on those along with Mr. Thompson. The appointment of officers was just a request to put the appointment and delegation bylaw on the agenda. So I wasn't sure what committee wanted to do with that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think it was more for discussion between the board and the opportunity to ask questions if there was any that jumped out at us. So is there any questions and specifics on this? Go ahead, Director Holmes.
Yeah, I was hoping it would come back with a bit more after it was deferred from last time. There were a number of things that both you had mentioned, Mr. Chair, and I had mentioned that I'd like to see, and it's not there. Specifically, some of the background, what changed in 2006, what was it before, why did it change to what it is now? What are some of the best practices, and what are other regional districts doing? What are member municipalities doing? Those I'd asked last week, and so I still like to see that. And I find the analysis here a little bit lacking. And I have another question. It says here that only the board would hire an officer, whereas you know, how's that different? I know in Summerland, the council has no role in hiring officers. We've had a couple financial officers and 4 different corporate officers since I've been on council, and council hasn't been involved in hiring any of them. So I don't understand how are regional districts different in that respect, or is that an incorrect statement?
CAO, can you shed some light on that?
Well, I provided the legislation, Mr. Chair. So in my mind, it's strictly discretionary as to what structure the board wants to have. But it would seem to me that the Local Government Act says that officers have to be appointed by the board.
Yeah, I think the point he's making is appointed is one thing, but hired is potentially another. So is there a differentiation anywhere in there in your mind, or?
Well, in my mind, if only the board can appoint an officer and only the board can terminate an officer, and the board is responsible for delegating responsibilities and incorporating that into a bylaw, that the authority is the board.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of makes sense to me in a way. Any other questions? Follow up? Go ahead.
Well, I would say that the board would assign a responsibility to a position, not to a person. And under the one employee model, the CAO would hire the person, not the board. It's the board establishes whose responsibilities the offices are, assigns that to that position. It's nothing to do with hiring practices.
Okay. Any further discussion, Director Knodel? I see a hand from you.
I think some of this is covered in the letter, the management letter from Jim Satine for the finance acceptance. There's some recommendations in that also that possibly should be looked at. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to have to discuss that. Director Bloomfield, go ahead.
Thank you. And yeah, just to follow up on Director Holmes there, within the city council don't appoint officers. The responsibility of hiring anybody below the one employee is the responsibility of that employee. In other words, the CAO. And so I think that you know, I mean, as a board, I mean, you know, do we hire officers? I've never seen resumes coming in for officer positions and having to make board decisions on selection processes. And at the same time, I haven't seen any discussion about letting go of any officers. I mean, you know, I know during COVID, you know, there were a couple of directors that were let go. I mean, you know, but that was announced to the board. It wasn't voted on by the board, as I remember, unless I could stand corrected on that. But I don't remember making a vote on that. But maybe the CAO could advise us on that.
Okay. CAO?
Yeah, the board of the regional district only has one officer, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, that's the existing model is we've only got the one officer. And this is an alternative method of it looking at if something that we want to do, it's an option. And it was partially suggested in that BDO report. So I seen another hand, Director Roberts and then Director Coyne. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. In regards to that letter, I was quite surprised. It was quite significant in its statements and recommendations. And so many of those things really tie into some of the concerns that we've had, some of the issues that it could have protected our CAO, et cetera. And My question being that when looking at the letter last night, it was received May 4th, and it's something that was a part of the audit. Why didn't the board see it then? Because I think there's a lot of significant information in that really addresses what we're looking at, and especially in regards to this information brought to us today.
Well, I should probably go to the CAO first. Go ahead.
So my understanding of that was it was a draft letter to the CFO, which is Mr. Safino. And typically what would happen is the CFO would look at it, provide an administrative response, and then the auditor would complete an approved letter. But again, that management letter is typically to the chief financial officer to improve controls within the organization. So in my experience, if it has ever come to an elected group, it has always come in camera, and it has always really been about controls.
Yeah.
Follow up?
Follow up? Go ahead.
So, and there being an RCFO is Mr. Newell, so it would have gone to you, and then you would have sent off your recommendations. Is that correct?
No, they went directly to Mr. Safino. I think designated accountants talk to designated accountants.
Okay. Director Coyne?
You hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So as to what Mr. Director Bloomfield was saying, we have officers, but the CAO is the one who hires them. We appoint them through council resolution, and I believe most municipalities operate the same way. The difference is the officers can be let go by the mayor or the chair of the board. So that's kind of the difference. But in our case, we've always our CFO can be released, but he is also appointed by the board, but he is hired by them. His recommendation for the hire comes from the CAO. Hope that makes sense.
Okay. Director Conant?
Yes, just a follow-up to the conversation before. Well, actually, our CEO was discussing, and just, I think referring to a letter that we all received with recommendations, and I think they're really important recommendations. So through the chair, I'd like to say that I think that should be attached to this report, and I don't see anything in it that should be really in camera. It's just a recommendation to possibly change the structure of our decision making in our organization. So I think that really should be something, since we're discussing it, something that the public can see also. And as I said, I don't think it is anything that needs to be in camera, and so it would be great if that was attached to this report.
Okay. Director McCordoff?
Thank you. When I was reading this letter last night, it occurred to me that I don't think in all the years I've been involved that I've seen those types of recommendations. And I mean, we've had the auditors deal with our reports for years and years. Is there a reason why this has come up now? Because in other years, I don't remember seeing something like that on there. What changed to make this happen this year? Thanks.
CAO?
I don't recall having seen a management letter for this organization in the past either. It's normal for a lot of local governments to get a management letter from their auditor. I've seen many of them over my years. As to what's changed this year, really, I think it was a change in auditors for one thing, but secondly, they send a management letter when they see weaknesses in the controls, and that's how they make their recommendations. So they've noticed some this year.
Okay. Director Gettins. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just talking about this letter as well, and I just want some clarity here, because if the letter's about weaknesses of control, and then the letter was sent to the chair and the CAO from Mr. Zaffino. My understanding that Mr. Zaffino is not the CFO, but he's the manager of finance. And what he was asking for support on 2 months ago was that these points are outside of his authority to implement. So I guess to the chair or CAO, how can Mr. Zaffino address these if it's outside of his authority? And I think that's the confusion here, because I thought that we had one person as the CAO, the CFO, and maybe the COO. But my understanding is Mr. Zaffino can't address some of these points, and he asked for that help from both the chair and the CAO. So I'm a little bit confused as to why we're 2 months later.
CAO?
Yeah, so only the board can release an officer. So under the act, I didn't put that section of it in, but for severance provisions for an officer, the officer, when released by the board, has the right to appeal to the board. And there's certain other considerations that only the board can do with the release. It's a special resolution. You can only do it by 2/3 majority, that sort of thing. So that's why I say it's really the responsibility of the board to sort of appoint an officer and then to sever an officer. With the management letter, it came to Mr. Zaffino as my understanding as a draft. He sent it out to the chair and CAO, advised that he'd be responding to the auditor. And when we got the final version, then he would bring that back. And we haven't seen anything since that time. So it's in progress, I would say.
Follow
So
up?
just as I do have follow-up, because that's not what I'm understanding. I'm understanding that Mr. Zaffino is made responsible, but because the majority of the points are outside of his authority to implement, he sent it to the CAO and chair. So does Mr. Zaffino then need to be appointed as the CFO in order to address this letter? Like, I don't understand. I think that, because I went back to watch this presentation on YouTube of our meeting, and we were told that, you know, we do have a new auditor, which is usually when these kind of things surface, when things, you know, because you have a new set of eyes, and that these suggestions were they're not massive or significant differences. So I agree with Director Conans that this isn't an in-camera conversation, but they're good practices that we should be supporting as a board. But as a board, we didn't know that these deficiencies were brought forward. And it kind of feels like, well, what I'm seeing is that there is a request for support from Mr. Zaffino to get these discrepancies addressed, and that wasn't happening. So how do we give Mr. Zaffino the power to address this letter?
I'll take a stab at this first. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think when it's a draft, he's not actually responding to making the changes. He's responding to if he agrees with those assessments from the auditors. And I suspect from that, then it comes back to the board as an official letter, and we would be the ones that would either implement changes or not. But CAO?
Just on the other point, Mr. Chair, so in our current structure, and this is discretionary, it's up for discussion by the board, whatever structure they want to put into a place. I have no idea why it was structured like this in 2006. That was before my time. But at that point, the board sitting decided that they would go with one CAO officer, and then the responsibilities for corporate administration and financial administration are delegated through job description. So under Mr. Zaffino's job description, he would have those responsibilities in the Act for financial administration. Ms. Malden has it for corporate administration. So that's done through the delegation bylaw. And what was the other question?
No, I can't exactly. Go ahead.
My other question is that this isn't making any sense to me. So my other question is why doesn't Mr. Zaffino feel like he has the authority to answer this letter? Why is it 2 months later? And like, this isn't making any sense to me.
So
why does it?
Yeah, Mr. Zaffino is working on it. He just hasn't had the time to respond yet. That's all. He's going to respond to the auditors.
The point she's making is she's getting the sense that he can't respond and he's asking for help. Is that?
Well, that's exactly what he says in the letter we all received, that he has asked this letter to be addressed to the CAO, but they stated they wanted Mr. Zafino to address the letter. He forwarded that to the chair and the CAO. And so now I feel like we're just expecting Mr. Zafino to do something that he doesn't feel like he has the authority of. I don't see any other responses here, and now we still have the draft letter. So I'm confused by what's the resolution? That does he have the authority to answer this letter? And why wasn't he told that 2 months ago then?
I believe he does have the authority to answer. He can't implement some of those changes. That would be up to us. Some of them he can. And
I don't know.
I've seen some other hands here. First, Director Knodel and then Director Holmes. And got you as well, Director Coyne.
Thank you. It just, you might notice in his email, he says he has now been directed to send this out to the board. And it is, of course, the audit of the financial statements and not an audit of our management system. In the first 2 paragraphs, they describe how they got there and what brought them to it. So I think we might be reading more into this than is really there. Thank you.
Okay, Director Holmes. Okay, Director Coyne.
I'll give you some background on what's going on here. In early June, I was asked about a management letter. On June 7th, I believe it was, I emailed the chair and asked him if he'd seen the management letter, and he said he saw a draft. And but we would talk to Bill about it the next day at the agenda review. We talked to Bill about it, and at that time, I was told that Jim had a copy and that I'd have to get it from him. Jim's been away. Unfortunately, I'm away right now. And so Director Roberts called me yesterday and asked me about the management letter. And I said, well, Jim, I think Jim is back. Unfortunately, I'm not here, so I haven't had time to connect up with Jim. So Director Roberts called Jim, and I said, if you call him, just have him send it out so that nobody calls me and asks me for questions on this management letter anymore. And the CAO, I did ask about all this before, and CAO said we have to get it from Jim. So that's why everybody got a copy of it, because I can't keep answering because I'm not here. So that's why everybody got a copy of it yesterday, and that's where this is all coming from. This is the first I've seen of it, and now you guys have seen it as well.
Yeah, it is pertinent to the discussion, though, and the appointment of officers, if that's a route we choose to go. And I thought I seen a hand from Director Bloomfield. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out where Mr. Zafino had announced that, to everybody. It was in his email, not in the letter. He announced that he didn't have the authority to implement some of the points in the letter. So in the email that he sent to Chair Pendergraft, May the 5th, on the second paragraph, he said, the auditors have made me responsible to address the points in the management letter. However, I'm forwarding the letter as the majority of the points are outside of by authority, and I think he meant my authority to implement. So, it's clearly points, according to that email, there's clearly points in the letter that, recommendations in the letter that are outside of his authority. And I think that's where, that came from. And yeah, so that's what we got to discuss.
Okay, Director Holmes.
I think regardless of whether it's Mr. Newell or Mr. Zafino who responds to the letter, I think we need to hear, as a board, need to hear from the auditors. I do think it needs to be in a closed session without staff present, because it could pertain to HR issues. We don't know. And so I'd like to put a motion on the table that the RDOS auditors, BDO, be requested to meet with the board in a closed session without staff present.
Okay, I see a seconder for that. Any discussion? Go ahead, Director Conant.
Yes, thank you, Through the chair, I don't really see the point in that, I mean, in that the auditors have, or the accountants have given us points that they think we should make, create action on, or action on these particular points. And if they come in and repeat the same things again, and again, I believe that this should be public, this letter should be attached to this report, and that at this point, instead of bringing the auditors in, I think that we should, I think that staff should create another session, open session, where we sit and talk about those points that were brought up that the auditors have recommended, and we decide on them. And I think it's pretty obvious that that's what needs to be done. And as I said, it would be a shame to have the auditors come in and just say the same things they've already said in the letter anyway. And again, I believe it should be an open meeting.
Okay. Director Coyne?
I understand that. I don't have a problem with the letter itself being public, but I think if we're going to have a candid discussion with the auditors that could result in an HR issue, then Director Holmes is right. We should have that in camera, because there could be, we don't know, but there could be an HR issue here. And once that comes out, we can come out with our decision afterwards. Or if there's nothing there, we can open the meeting back up. But if there's an HR issue there, we do have to protect our employee and any employee who may be named or whatever in that discussion. So I would caution that we do everything in public, because if there is an HR issue there, then we could be liable.
CAO?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, my experience, the auditors have always sent the management letter to the CAO as well. And then the CAO would do an administrative response and take that to the board, so that you get both sides. Because we all know when consultants submit a report, you don't always agree, or some of them are not always practical from that third-party review. But I was going to say, Mr. Safino is online. If the board wanted to ask these questions of him, I'm sure we could bring him in.
Okay, so if there is some questions, we can definitely direct them to Mr. Safino. Anything further on this? We've got the motion on the floor. Go ahead, Director Holmes.
I totally hope the process will continue on the staff end, that they will provide their response, and we do hear the administration. But regardless, we still need to hear from the auditors. We still need to speak to the auditors. This is a classic example of where you want to talk to the auditors.
Okay, Director Monteith and then Director Gettins.
And through the chair, I'm going to say that I am disappointed that this came out in May and it's now July, and we're just figuring all of this out. And I've followed the board for many years before I was elected, second term. There's always been the letter from the auditors. And I recall last year, Jim made a comment about, no news is good news in the letter. That's great. This year, when it wasn't there, I was really surprised, and I've been looking for it ever since. So thankful that we got it. I'm happy that the board is finally looking at doing something and figuring out what we can do to protect our organization. I think our residents expect transparency. So I think we are going down the right path. And I think, Director Holmes, you're absolutely correct. I think we need to get some advice.
Okay. On that point, the letter you're referring to that we've received in the past was not a management letter. It was just the regular letter that you get every year from the auditors stating that they found no misrepresentations and so forth. That we received. This is the first time we've actually received a management letter, and it was in draft form. I did see another hand, and now it's gone. Oh, Director Gettins, go ahead.
Thanks. This will be my last comment, because I know I spoke about this already, but to be fair to the letter, and to be fair to the auditors, I don't believe the letter is full of massive discrepancies. Like they said, when we read them, they all seem pretty straightforward to address, and I think they do need to be addressed. But I agree with Director Monteith around the process of this being a few months later, and us not having this information earlier. So I do think we should talk to the auditors. I think we do need to have a candid in-camera session and have a discussion about this process. And then I think we need to get back to the other part of the agenda here is talking about the different CAO and CFO comments as well. But I just wanted to let you know, it's just a 2 months of process is a long time to, in my opinion, to find out information.
Yeah. Seeing no more, oh, Director McCordoff, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm concerned about having a closed meeting with the auditors and not some staff there. And I'm thinking that that could be open to interpretation from anybody, any of us that are there, and I think that is not fair. So I'm fine with a closed meeting where we discuss all of this with the auditors, but I think we need staff there as well for everybody's protection. Thanks.
Go to you after I go to Director Bloomfield. Go ahead.
Yeah, all I can do is really my own experience on council in Summerland is that we regularly have the auditors come to us and present these things and ask us, do we want to meet with them without staff present? And sometimes we do, sometimes we say it's not necessary. It's to help clear up some things, and that's it's to protect the auditors as well. So it's not an unusual process at all.
Okay. Director Bloomfield.
Thank you. And yeah, I'll be in favor of going into a closed meeting simply for the reason that when there's uncertainty about going into a closed meeting, then it's best to go into the closed meeting and then have that quick discussion as to whether you should stay in closed or go into open. If there's no real reason to stay in closed, then you can just shut the meeting down and go straight into an open meeting. I think that, you know, on a subject like this, there may be some uncertainties and things that we don't know about, or, you know, we haven't thought about as to whether it should go closed or open. So the best default is to go into closed. If you shouldn't be enclosed, then you can quickly decide that and then go into open. And whether the staff should be there or not, you could start off at that default position of no staff and then quickly decide whether the conversation merits having the staff there or not, and you can invite staff back into the closed meeting. So just my thoughts on that.
Okay, CAO?
Yeah, there's certainly no objection from staff on the board going into a closed meeting without staff, Mr. Chair. That's fairly typical. I mean, that's really the point of an audit, is to look at whether the staff is performing well or not. So that would be quite appropriate.
Okay, seeing no more hands, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Do we need those named? Okay, motion still carries. Anything further? Go ahead, Director Wiebe.
Well, and I think to the point of the discussion about the appointment of officers, Bill mentioned Jim Savino as a CFO, but my understanding is he's technically not. So as somebody new to the table, that is something I find confusing, because you either are or you aren't. If you're a financial manager, that's fine, but you're not a CFO. And that goes to the point that we only have technically one officer. So I just need to clarify, because in my understanding, we don't have a corporate officer, we don't have a CFO, we only have a CAO, and I think that's actually the conversation, is to how we got there. Is that something we need to keep doing, or is that something that we can adjust and make amendments to? Because I think that is on the board's authority to look at those things structure-wise. So I just need to clarify that.
Yeah, you're correct. We've only have managers as far as the corporate manager of corporate oh gosh, how do I word that? No, I'm getting tongue-tied, but manager of finance and the corporate affairs is probably the right term. We may change that, but that should probably be after we have the discussion with BDO and then see from their side where we want to go. Director Monteith?
And through the chair, what is the process to change that? What does that look like?
It would just be I would assume just a board motion stating that we want to change our office or go to officer positions. CAO, can you help me out with that?
Yeah, it is strictly discretionary, Mr. Chair. So the board could decide to change the structure under the Act. if you want to appoint an officer, you must do so by bylaw. So you'd have an officer appointment bylaw, and in there, you would set up the positions. In this case, if you're looking at the financial administration responsibilities under the Act, the corporate officer responsibilities under the Act, and then if you wanted a CAO appointment under the Act, and you would set out, as you have in your current bylaw, you'd set out the responsibilities of each of those officer positions, and then appoint people to those positions.
Okay. So it would require a bylaw.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Director Monteith.
Through the chair, is that something that the manager of human resources would help us with? Or like, how do we get that going? Because I believe that based on the information that we've received from the management letter to all the conversation we've had, that feels like the direction that we're going in. So do we start looking at that? Do we get something going with that? Like, I guess we just keep talking, but there's no action. And I'm looking for that action point of what we're doing next.
We haven't made a decision yet, so until that's done, then there would be some action. Anything further? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is connectivity in the RDOS website, CAO.
Sure. So we can start on this, Mr. Chair. We did have another delegation under Environment and Infrastructure. We have the consultant.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Can we finish one of these ones off or get a brief on it?
Yeah, we'll give it to Danny. Maybe he can just describe what he's going to do.
Quick and as efficient as I can, doing a few hats here. We had two items on the agenda, which was connectivity and the website. I have Eric Thompson here with me as well to discuss the website portion. I don't know if we can really complete, well, we can complete whatever you like. I will talk a little bit about the connectivity delegation of what we do with all of our connectivity as it relates to the RDOS. And then the reason Eric is here, or sorry, Mr. Thompson is here, is because the website is not a single department type of item. It touches many departments at the RDOS. We typically deal with it in the IT version, a lot of the back end pieces, making sure it's functioning and things like that. But many departments at the RDOS have a touch on the website. So Mr. Thompson and Legislative Services are a big part of that, and he's here to help describe our kind of plans going forward as a team, looking at the website and how that addresses the RDOS functionality. I will quickly share the PowerPoint we have started, and just going to make that bigger. So if that's okay, I'll start with the connectivity piece at any time. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll move ahead from that. As soon as we get into the RDOS website, Eric's going to come up and join, and we'll carry on with some slides again, whatever you want and whatever you feel comfortable answering or asking questions on, we're here to help. Connectivity piece. The slide deck in front of you quickly shows the types of connectivity we currently engage in today. There are many types of connectivities, and I think the reason I wanted to put this on here so that people understand what we mean by connectivity in an IT sense. So our radios tie into our EOC systems, our satellite systems, which many places aren't really familiar with yet, but there are over 7 or 8 satellite providers that are going to become more prominent in the near future if you start looking at those. And they aren't necessarily related to the Canadian systems, which you'll see in a later slide deck. Our actual internet connectivity, where many things are changing, whether it's fiber, coax, the old telephone lines, all of these are aspects of how we deal with connectivity today, because connectivity isn't just internet. It's all sorts of types of connectivity. I also listed our phones there. we have cellular, we have PSTN, we have voice over IP. I want to touch on, we are doing a major upgrade to our voice over IP system and cooperation with the school district who had worked for many years with the voice over IP system. That system is just dated. It was put in many years ago, 12 years ago, I believe, and we're at the point of doing a migration. So right now we're in the process of a migration of our voice over IP system, which affects this building. The annex building is also the building at 176 Main Street as well, across from the City Hall. That is in process, and it's just a normal upgrade that we're doing in the background over voice over IP. There's also a study done on the emergency management where we look at radio over IP. You'll see that acronym in the slide deck as well. That's what it stands for. And that's where we touch on how we mitigate radio signals and use the internet to propagate those and connect other regions. Similkameen and Okanagan is very large, RDOS, so there's aspects of each of these technologies you'll see across our entire ecosystem. So I wanted to list them there. These aren't all pertinent to public entities per se. A lot of these are internal operations, but I wanted to give you an idea of what they entail, what kind of connectivities we're involved with, and what other aspects in the sense of a governance body, as yourselves as directors here, can possibly touch when it comes to these types of connectivity issues. Because a lot of the possibilities of what we do with ILECs or telcos or cablecos really stem from these types of connectivity issues that exist. We do utilize a lot. There's also private fiber on there as well, on some connectivity depending on which municipality we may be working with. We have some private fiber as well that's included. I wanted to show kind of what's happening at the provincial level. So this slide represents the connectivity for the RDOS. The homes they currently, as of the 2001 census, have taken, and the types of connectivity. So this is public website, public information. I can send to you if you like and are more curious about it. We do monitor a lot of things on the web and sites when it comes to connectivity. And it's not just internet. It is all those other items that we've talked about, which is a lot more broad when you think of connectivity. Try not to narrow it down to just your cell phone or your internet feed. There's a lot more to it. One thing I wanted to touch on with what's happening at the provincial level is a slide deck. So you'll notice here the service providers in our area, and there's one missing, obvious one, and that's satellite. So Starlink isn't even considered on this, and this is coming from the provincial body here. And that's what's happening with the world. Things are moving very quickly. There are actually 7 different low-lying satellite operators out established across the world. Doesn't mean we don't have access to them or services from them. So Starlink, which is one we've already tested and utilized, we utilize them in our EOC operations. We utilize them at our Loose Bay campground for services as well. They're not even listed at the provincial body and the connectivity report because it's a worldwide type of connectivity issue when it comes to them. When they provide us service, they don't even have to be in Canada, let's say, to really be giving us that service because it's coming from low-lying orbital satellites. However, as a service of what we do here at the RDOS and internally with the IS department and IT people is we're looking at all types of connectivity. We're not just limited to what is in our own region, which is a list there. We have ABC Communications, Bell, China Creek, Eastgate, Freedom Mobile, Rogers, Shaw, TELUS, and ExploreNet. We're familiar with all of those, plus the other vendors then people that operate services available to us, such as Starlink and things like that, and try to make the best determination of what is the best bang for buck for the service, for what we're trying to do, what we're trying to accomplish. And that's a constantly changing field. We've been in contact with many of those service providers. Rogers and Shaw, for now, they're combining. That's been known for a while in the public sector. We've had meetings with both of them. We have sites and operations that we're looking at and seeing how we mitigate those things moving forward. Those are 2 companies out there that we have services of, and they have a very large footprint in the RDOS area. And how that's going to culminate into the services they provide for us is going to change substantially. So at some future day, I'd love to report back to the board on how that actually progresses, because that is in progress right now. I had meetings with both of them in the last month discussing our contracts as well as how things are moving within their ecosystem. To be true, I don't know if they know themselves. It's a very large merger, and it affects a lot of things to deal with in the CRTC and how things are moving forward. The other little item on the bottom there, just so you're aware, is some of the projects that have already been allotted monies. There's links in those I can provide the slide deck to the board, so you should wish. And those are just links that are at the government level to show the dollars that have been assigned to these projects. So it touches on the Similkameen area, the LTE deployments that have been done through ABC Communications. And just a little note there that ABC Communications, if you're not aware, has actually been bought by TELUS. So even though it says ABC Communication, it is actually TELUS outfit now that they're owned by. And the Careme's Fiber to the Home, which some of the members in this room would be aware of how that's touched different people in the area. Any questions on all that? Sorry, I rushed. That's very quick on that piece, but there's connectivity. There's all sorts of it. We're established in many forms of it, even forms beyond the scope of what BC is looking at, to give the best service that we can to RDOS constituents as well as to the staff and the operations rerun. So future, I want to bring back a little more once we get information on what's happening with Shaw and the Rogers merger. That affects our cell phone plans, it affects our land services. It affects certain areas of the RDOS that doesn't have a good presence of connectivity that may be representative one or the other. So that's about all I had to give to the board in the sense of connectivity. Any other questions, I'm always around to ask on them. Okay. All right. Sure.
Guess I better have that mic on. Brings us to Environment and Infrastructure Committee. Director Gettins.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring the meeting to order at 11:01. Can I get an approval of the agenda, please? Oh, sorry, I've got to wait till the screen comes down. I can't see everybody. I'm going to assume that everybody approves the agenda. If there's anybody that's opposed, speak up while I'm waiting for the screen to come down. There we go. All right, no one's opposed to the agenda. Perfect. We've got one item on the agenda today, the organic waste treatment and processing facility, and I'll refer this over to the CAO, please.
And I'll just turn this over to Mr. Reader, Madam Chair.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Reader, do I?
Thank you. So I'll just briefly introduce our guests. So we have Dr. David Lycon. He is the project manager for AECOM, who's done an options analysis for potential designs at 1313 Greyback Mountain Road, given the space restrictions that we are now faced with. David has also worked with the City of Penticton on previous studies to look at options for managing their biosolids, so he's well versed in all issues around our organics processing. And David is going to provide a presentation to you on our findings and answer any technical questions that you might have. And I can speak to certainly any process questions that you might have. So with that, maybe we'll start with David. Hopefully he's online.
Thanks. Dr. Lycon?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I don't know if Andrew is the presentation. Do you guys bring up the presentation or do I?
Danny, can you help out with that?
I'll bring it right up. Thanks.
Thank you. So Danny will bring that up in a minute for us.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can just, oh, it's coming. Perfect. And I think once we get going, I think if you just ask Danny to the next slide when you're ready to go, then he'll follow along with you and that'd be great. Thanks. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, good morning, everybody. And thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak to you. about the organic waste system review that AECOM did on behalf of the RDOS. I'll provide everybody with a little bit of project background. We were initially engaged by the regional district to look at some work that Tetra Tech had already undertaken for the RDOS, looking at the various opportunities for organic waste management within the regional district. Now, when we discuss organic waste, the main feed streams here we're looking at are like kitchen waste, yard waste, disposable paper, and in some instances, wastewater treatment solids, which would mainly be coming from the wastewater treatment plant.
I'm so sorry, Dr. Lycan. There's a lot of background noise coming from the boardroom, Dan. Is there a mic on somewhere? It's just hard to hear when we're online. Like I can hear people moving around and it's quite, okay, go ahead, sorry. Oh, there, I think it's muted now. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And in our review, one of the main things we looked at was the cost estimates that were developed by Tetra Tech. In our opinion, were a little bit on the conservative side. So because of this, the cost to deliver the services was being driven up. So what we did was we looked at, one of our main tasks was to look at these cost estimates for the various options. And then to further complicate matters, in January of 2023, the Agricultural Land Commission rendered their decision, which would allow portions of the ALR that were on the parcel of land that the RDOS had not to be made available for this facility. So with that in mind, the regional district asked us to look at developing concepts and cost estimates that would fit within the actual available land that was on the 1313 Grayback Road site. So next slide, please. Now, just to give you a little bit of context on the site itself, this is a Google image where you can see the actual site. And the red outline, that indicates the overall parcel of land that the regional district owns, the 1313 Grayback site, which is, relatively close proximity to the landfill. The portion in green is the ALR lands, so that which is not really available for developing this facility. And then finally, the blue outline is effectively what is really feasible for the building of the facility. There is more adjacent land, but the topography there, you're going up a fairly steep incline, and it would involve a good deal of blasting, and it's not really feasible area to build. So it's really that blue area is what we're focusing on. So can I have the next slide, please? So what we did is we looked at the only options we developed were ones that involve composting of the organic waste, and that was broken down into three main options, which were the sustainable generations or the GORE system. And I'll explain these all in a little bit more detail in some subsequent slides. Another one was the enclosed aerated windrow system. And then finally, the enclosed aerated bunker system. And we'd subdivided this into two, looking at only organic waste, and then another option, which would be looking at organic waste and the wastewater solids coming from the Penticton wastewater treatment plant. Next slide, please. So in terms of quantities of organic waste, this was taken directly from the Tetra Tech report. We utilized their information that they had provided, and effectively, if you exclude the wastewater treatment solids and the bulking agent that would be required, you're basically looking at roughly about 2,300 tons per month that would have to be processed, and that would all be originating from the regional district. Next slide, please. So option one, which was the GORE system, in a nutshell, the GORE system works where you build up the piles of compostable material, and those are over an aerated grid, and then you cover that with a GORE material, so much like you have in your waterproof jackets. And the whole point of this is It allows a lot of heat and odor to be maintained underneath the cover, and it allows the retention of moisture as well. So next slide, please. Yeah. In terms of odor reduction, literature says that you can reduce odors sort of 70 to 90%. Some of the vendors will purport to have higher odor reduction, but that's kind of more of a realistic number. It is a proprietary solution, so the inherent costs that come with proprietary solutions are embedded in the cost as well. And just also, here are some examples of these type of facilities in British Columbia, some of which are indoors and some of which are solely outdoors. I guess most interest to the RDOS would be the recently completed one in Oliver, which is solely an outdoor facility. Next slide, please. And this is laying it out on the available land. This is kind of gives you a sense of what the footprint would be and how we could accommodate it. And as you can see, it's a very busy footprint. It encompasses a good deal of that blue area that I showed in an earlier slide. So it would be it could be a bit of a challenge to fit this in within the site available. Next slide, please. Option 2 is what's referred to as enclosed aerated window system. And in this picture, you just get a sense of, again, it's all contained within a building, and you get a sense of, how the compost piles are built within the building. So next slide, please. These are open windrows. They are covered, but rather than covering it with like the gore material from the previous option, you're actually covering it with finished compost, and this allows you to mitigate odors as well. The windrows are aerated as part of the process, and this also helps to reduce some of the odor issues. And it is a lower cost than the gore system because you don't have the interior walls, and you also aren't using the proprietary technology as well. And again, there are a few examples here in BC, both indoor and outdoor as well. Next slide, please. And this provides you, again, the footprint here, not quite as dense as option 1. So it allows for constructability. It'll be a little bit easier in terms of getting it on the site itself. So now, one of the things I'd like to talk about in terms of footprint, why footprint is important, is we're proposing enclosed facilities. And the smaller the footprint you have, the easier it is to manage the odor that comes from the composting process, and the easier it is to treat it. So that's an important factor. It reduces energy, it reduces capital costs, et cetera. So next slide, please. So the final option we looked at was what's referred to as enclosed aerated bunker system. And as you can see, also within a building, but these bunkers are fully enclosed and sealed up during the processing of the material itself. Next slide, please. With this process, you could also build your piles higher. This in turn reduces the footprint of the building, and again, lessens the capital costs and makes odor control a little bit more manageable. This type of process has been used for both organic waste and for wastewater solids. And again, here I've noted some facilities in BC, all of which are actually housed within buildings. We don't have any solely outdoor ones because there is quite a bit of odor generated from this type of process. Next slide, please. And then this, again, showing the footprint of option 3, which is, significantly reduced over option 1 and somewhat reduced over option 2. So this is the smallest footprint of the 3 technologies that we looked at. Next slide, please. Now, the city of Penticton generates waste solids from the wastewater treatment plant, which have to be managed. And so we looked at this option 3A, which is looking sort of being able to compost organic waste and wastewater solids as well. One of the challenges here, though, is that they will have to be segregated because the end product is somewhat different. The wastewater solids, the end product has limited reusability. There's also significant concerns with what's referred to as PFAS compounds, and those are, you may hear about those in the news, and those are kind of forever chemicals, they call them, because they're very persistent compounds, and they are a challenge to treat, and they are on regulators' radar screen now, so it is something that could come up in the future. The other thing is with wastewater solids, you also have to have the availability of a bulking agent, which is generally clean wood waste. So that adds further complexity in material handling. And one of the other features, the grant funding that has been made available to the regional district was based solely on an organic waste facility and really didn't speak to the wastewater solids. In terms of funding or the costs, the operating costs, there's a third-party solution which has been proposed, which is Aero Transportation, and they haul the material to one of their mine reclamation sites. And based on a 2020 service cost that was published in a report, that was noted to be $125 a ton. AECOM undertook a study for the city of Penticton in 2018, and we identified the cost there being at the time about $140 to $150 per ton. So you can sort of get a sense of the difference between a third-party solution and your own, internal solution. Next slide, please. So once we had those three options, we developed capital cost estimates for each. You can see the three options. The option 3 was the least cost in terms of capital. And again, a lot of this relates to the smaller footprint of the facility. Next slide, please. We also established O&M costs for each of the options, and they're comparatively fairly similar, with option 3 again coming in at a slightly lower cost. And a lot of this is driven by lower electricity costs and some slightly lower maintenance costs as well. Next slide, please. And taking the capital and the annual costs, we were able to roll those into an annualized cost. And this also factored in the grant funding that is available to the regional district. And then with that annualized cost, we divide it by the amount of tons that were processed, and then you come up with your cost per ton processed. And in this instance, the one that includes biosolids is lower, but it's a bit misleading because it's a lower cost just because you are processing more material. So option 3 of the options 1, 2, and 3 is the lowest cost per ton processed. Next slide, please. So in our report, our recommendation to the regional district was to carry forward option 3, which is the aerated bunker composting. It's a readily expandable process, and in the future, should some of that adjacent ALR land become available, there is an opportunity perhaps to develop an option or an add-on which would be able to process the city Penticton's wastewater solids. This, as I said, also this one has a very small footprint and will be able to mitigate odor much more effectively with this type of technology. And then finally, with its proximity to the landfill, there may be an opportunity to utilize some shared resources and also find an end use for some of the compost as landfill cover itself. So next slide, please. And this one final slide I want to leave you with is how long is this project going to take to deliver? We're looking at just short of a 2-year period of time, and that involves, the design, looking at a value engineering or a value analysis exercise, and then tender and award, construction, commissioning, all told roughly about a 2-year process altogether. That is the end of my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just gonna look at the table to see if there are any questions. No, I don't see any hands up, nothing. Oh, Director Federico, please.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm a little late to this conversation and what's been going on, just being a new director, but looking at the current landfill, there's space to the east side of Spiller Road. So is there a reason that we're trying to squish this onto a small part of the non-ALR piece of what the RDOS owns, supposed to utilizing part of the east side of Spiller Road that is currently part of the landfill parcel? Is there a way to make it bigger but use that grassy kind of treed area that's there?
Thanks. I'm not sure, Director or Mr. Reader, is that for you?
Sure, I can attempt to use it. I don't think we wouldn't use portions of that land. The challenge that we need is basically a big piece of flat land to work on. And most of that land above Spiller Road, so that would be to the east of Spiller Road, that land is on a slope, but there are parts of it that we might be able to utilize for storage, and that would be our intent. The main facility that you're seeing there is really just the buildings and its constructability. And so we felt that because that is our flattest piece of land and we need sort of a big square piece of land to work with, that's what we've been forced to go at.
Thanks. Director Federico, is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Director Monteith, please.
Thank you. Through the chair. I guess I'm looking at the ALR or ALC application process, and looking at that map, what were we denied, what section of that were we denied for before, and now we're looking at going back for a non-farm use? Is that the same, like, I'm not sure what if we're asking for the same thing, different part of the property? Can you explain?
Great questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Reader.
Too anxious. Thank you. So great question. So what we applied for previously was an exclusion, and that was at the advice that we had from the ALC. What we're asking to apply for now is a non-farm use. So that doesn't take it out of the ALR, but what it does is says you can work within these parameters inside the ALR. And we've had legal advice given to us that says that we are able to apply for a non-farm use. And we do feel that there are substantive benefits to the agricultural community, and there are a number of recent exclusions actually made by the province for such facilities. And these things, examples would be Kelowna, Comox, Abbotsford, Courtenay. So all these facilities have been recently approved, and we feel that it would make some sense to see if we can make that work.
Thanks. Director Monteith?
Yeah, through the chair. Would it not make sense to expand our ask for the non-farm use, that we're not getting just a small section? Ask maybe for larger so we have that opportunity for growth?
Thanks. Mr. Reader?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the, I guess, and we didn't really cover the process, but one of the things that we would do with this is after the procurement process has taken place, through the pre-design, we would say what would be our current and future needs. And that would be part of the pre-design for what we call phase 2 or the Penticton works. So this would be the biosolids and potential growth. What we're really focused on today was really trying to get a direction for moving forward and make best use of our grant, because we have very limited time. We would certainly include in our application any areas for growth.
Thanks. Director Monteith? Good. Okay, great. Sorry, Mr. Reader, did you say that the ALC advised us to apply for an exemption and then denied the exemption?
Yeah, so what we didn't apply for an exemption. They asked us to do an exclusion is what they suggested. And typically what will happen is the ALC will, if they want to consider other options, they would undertake bargaining with you. They would say, okay, well, if you do this, this, and this, we'll let you do with what you're looking at doing. In this particular case, they really didn't communicate at all with us. They just said no. And really, in staff's opinion, that was unfortunate.
Yeah, thank you. Director Van Alpen, did you have your hand up?
I did, thank you, Chair. Just a question through the chair. So I'm assuming there's a substantial amount of heat generated, especially in this bunker style. Is there any ideas on how are we going to try to capture that resource, heating water or anything like that?
Mr. Reader?
We have been looking at, kind of interestingly enough, the option of converting some of the biomass into biogas, and that would be through digestion. And we've been working with Jeremy, who's been looking at studies with that, and we've been also putting that forward to Fortis. And there are opportunities to look at that. When we look at the capital cost, we've done some preliminary work of that like, and when we've looked at that without grants, it really didn't seem to be that economically feasible. So we have looked at it.
Thanks, Mr. Reader. Director Bloomfield, please.
Thank you, and through the chair, Mr. Reader, on the past applications to the ALC for an exclusion, was a consultant used in those applications, or was it just staff that was making the application? And what are the plans for future applications for non-agricultural use? Is that going to be done by the staff, or is that going to be done by through a consultant?
Great, thanks, Mr. Reader.
Our intention, in the past, we've done it through staff, and that was mainly through our planning department that had done that. And we do have some actual staff that used to work for the ALC in our planning department, so they're well versed in what needs to occur. Our intent was to make the application again through our planning department. If there's a desire, we could certainly look at the possibility of outsourcing that. But our intent at this point is just to use staff, and those staff, again, used to work for the ALC in the approvals area, which we're very fortunate to have.
Thanks, Mr. Bloomfield. Any follow, or Director Bloomfield, any follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate the fact that, we have staff that used to work for the ALC, but it didn't seem to help with any results. And so I'm just, I know that, staff are short and don't have a lot of time, and I'm just wondering if a dedicated consultant might do have more time to spend on it because they're getting paid to do that specific job. So it's just a thought I'm putting out there, but if staff are confident of doing a wholesome, fulsome application to the ALC, then okay. But I would say that if you need help, then don't be afraid to ask.
Thanks, Director Bloomfield. So we've just got a few minutes left, and there is an administrative recommendation here. And I just wanted to check in with the board to see if anybody's comfortable moving the recommendation. Great, thank you. I see Director Roberts, is there a seconder? Director Bloomfield is seconding it. Any further discussion on the recommendation? Everyone's clear on the recommendation? Okay. Perfect. All those in favor? Any opposed? Perfect, thank you. I think that's all we've got then. So I'll call for a motion to adjourn the meeting. It is 11:28. All those in favor? Okay, wait, sorry. First and seconded, thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Over to you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Gettens. We'll move straight into the Regional District Okanagan-Similkameen regular board meeting, and we got 2 minutes before we got to start. You're right. If we can start making our way back to our seats, we'll get started shortly. All is. Okay, we'll call the Regional District Okanagan-Smilkameen regular board meeting to order. And this is an opportunity to remove anything from the consent agenda. If anybody has something they want to remove, Director Monteith, go ahead.
And through the chair, I'd like to remove Parks and Recreation Commission A1 2.2.
A1 2.2. Okay. That will go into the regular
Thank you.
portion. Anything else to be removed out of the consent? Seeing none, looking for a motion to approve the agenda then. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the consent agenda, corporate services. Looking for a motion to adopt. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. Consent agenda, development services. Looking for a motion for that one. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Great. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us down to item B, development services building inspection, B1, CAO.
This is an accessory building that was completed without a building permit, Mr. Chair. It is in the agricultural land reserve. It has a stop work order on it, and we've had no contact from the property owner with regards to resolving the matter. So we're recommending, it's not a safety issue for us. We're just recommending we put a notice on title so that any future purchaser would know that it was not in compliance.
Okay. Go to Director Taylor for direction.
Well, as I see it, this is a building built without permit. Staff are saying it's not a safety issue. It's not, not used for living accommodations, so I feel that the note on title is an appropriate response, and I'd like to move the administrative recommendation.
Okay, so you're moving it, seconded. It's on the floor. Generally, we ask if there is the owner or applicant in the room or online and that want to address the board in this case. Not seeing anybody. Raise your hand if you're online. Anybody, Danny? Okay, seeing none. Any discussion from the board on this? We've got the motion on the floor to put the notice on title. Seeing no discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Over to C1, temporary use permit in electoral area D, CAO.
This is an application from the owners of the Twilight Motel in Okanagan Falls. Mr. Chair, they want to redevelop eventually, but at this point, they want permission to add 5 stalls for recreational vehicles for a period of 3 years while they get their development plans in order. And we're recommending that that be approved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Go to Director Taylor.
Mike's on.
Good.
Yeah, and I just note that the developers are here in the room. Jim Morrison, Chris Schoen, they're not given the opportunity to speak at this point, but I think that's an indication of their commitment. I note that these are RV sites, not a tent campground facility, and their commitment throughout the community to do a number of developments, this being one in a staged format, with this one starting in about 2026. So I'd like to move the administrative recommendation.
Okay, moved. Is there a seconder? It's on the floor. Any discussion on this? Again, seeing no hands. This one is a rural vote. All those in favor? Thank you.
Coming
Any
to the country,
opposed?
Jim?
Motion carries. Down to C2, a development variance permit in electoral area E, CAO.
This is a cannabis production facility, Mr. Chair, and it's currently has a cement floor, and in our bylaw, cannabis production facilities are required to have a soil-based floor. And that, at the time that that was initiated, was in concurrence with the Agricultural Land Commission regulations for cannabis production facilities, which they have since changed. So we don't see any problem with this, Mr. Chair, and we're recommending that this application be approved.
Okay, I will go to Director Fedrigo for direction.
I would like to send this to my APC, please.
Okay, so you're making the motion for it to be sent to the APC?
Yes,
Area
please.
E, APC?
Area APC.
Is there a seconder for that? It's on the floor. Any discussion? Again, seeing no hands, this is a rural vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. C3. Make sure I got this right. Okay, it's the same agenda item almost, but subdivision in Area E. CAO.
Yeah, this is an application to the Agricultural Land Commission. It's to permit a 4-lot subdivision. It's a 4-hectare parcel right now, and they want to subdivide into 4 1-hectare lots. And we're recommending that this be allowed to not be authorized to proceed to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Okay, again, Director Fedrigo, direction.
I'd like to move the administrative recommendation, please.
Okay, so we're moving that. Is there a seconder? It's on the floor. And since this is to not authorize it to go, we would ask if the applicant or owner is in the room.
Which one are we on?
C3 or online.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see the not.
It's to not authorize. We'll give them the opportunity to address the board if they're available. Not seeing any hands. Nothing online, Danny. Okay, we will proceed. Any discussion on this? Quiet bunch today. Call the question, and this one is a corporate vote. So all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. C4, official community plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment in electoral area A, CAO.
Yeah, this is for third reading for a 6-lot subdivision in Area A, Mr. Chair, and we're holding it at third because we're recommending that prior to adoption that a covenant be registered for a 5.6 hectare lot be transferred to the Southern Interior Land Trust for conservation area. So our recommendation is to give this third reading, Mr. Chair.
Okay, would someone be willing to move that for me? Moved and seconded. On the floor, any discussion needed on this one? Seems to me that this was a result or just had a public hearing. I should have given a public hearing, what do you call it, brief, because it was held outside.
Oh.
And I will just say that, but there's nothing here to say. There was a certain 6 members of the public and attended. In Osoyoos it was held at this. Where is the public hearing on the minutes? Is it in somewhere? Maybe I better ask. Go ahead.
It's just an agenda item. It should be attached to this particular item.
Okay, so it is in here, but I should have made note that it represents what happened at the public hearing, just so that people are aware of that. Any discussion further on this? Not seeing any hands, and this one is a rural vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for that. Area or C5 in zoning amendment bylaw and Area C, CAO.
This is the Backyard Farms application, Mr. Chair, and it's a site-specific amendment to allow an eating, drinking establishment in an agricultural zone. It has been to the Agricultural Land Commission. They've authorized it. So we're recommending that this be given first and second reading and sent to public hearing on July 20th, Mr. Chair.
I will go to Director Knodel for direction.
Thank you. I'd like to move the administrative recommendation. This has been a viable asset to our farming community. Thank you.
Okay, it's moved, seconded, it's on the floor. Any discussion? Golly, it is quiet. This one is again a rural vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Official Community Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment in Area F, CAO.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is a large part, a 15.4 hectare parcel, and it's in a resource area in Area F. They want to amend it to permit a 2-lot subdivision, so going from resource area to large holdings, small holdings. It's implicated by the Trout Lake watershed, and it had previously been deferred pending the Falder zone review, which we've now received. So we're recommending that this application be denied, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Director Gettens, direction on this?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I'll move the administrative recommendation, please.
Okay, moved. Is there a seconder for that? It's on the floor. Any discussion? Oops, before I go to the discussion, since it's a motion to deny, I will ask if the applicant is in the room and wanted to address the board. If they could just come up to the front table and hit the button on the little console to make the green light come on, and you're
ready to go?
Ready to go, please.
Thank you. Good morning. We would like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak. We are Kathy and Doug Penny of 1108 Fish Lake Road. We bought our property in 1976 and have waited patiently for 43 years to subdivide 7 acres of our 38-acre parcel, which is naturally bisected by Fish Lake Road. In our area, there are 4 38-acre lots, of which Lot 1 is already legally subdivided by Fish Lake Road. The total 160-acre block is surrounded by Crown land. We built our log home and raised our 3 children who all boarded the school bus at our driveway. We are serviced by BC Hydro, TELUS, School District 67, and AIM, the road maintenance contractor. Our current costs to date include the RDOS application fee, the environmental assessment fee, survey costs, and the rezoning sign, of all which totals $8,300, but does not include the Penticton Indian Band's quoted cost of $2,160 for their cultural heritage resource assessment. It was at some point during the process recommended by the RDOS staff to spend even more money by engaging in the services of a planning consultant to assist us with our application. We wondered what more a planning consultant would do for us to help move this application forward. A recent quote from ICBC to insure our firewood truck is $663 annually to cross the 66-foot gazetted Fish Lake Road. Would any of you pay annually to cross the 66-foot road to access the rest of your property? Our date of application was February 22nd, 2022, 16 and a half months ago. And at that time, it was indicated by RDOS staff that it would take approximately 6 months to process. We were incorrectly included in with Falder when in fact our property is 11 kilometers north of the Falder water system and 3 kilometers north of the Meadow Valley Aquifer Study boundary. The RDOS makes numerous references to the Falder Aquifer Study and the availability of water. The Water Sustainability Act allow for domestic water use, notable a drilled well, which would service the 7 acres, effectively making the study a non-issue for this application. Of note, Dark Creek flows southerly on the west side of Fish Lake Road, and the property we are referencing is on the east side of Fish Lake Road, with no surface water available to affect Dark Creek. As you're probably aware, with our present zoning being resource area, we have a possible 16 uses for our land, of which 9 would require more daily water use than a single-family dwelling, and one in particular, which is gravel processing, would be most detrimental to the rural character of the area. Several invitations to view our property have met with resistance, with comments like a site visit not being important as it would not have an impact on the staff's recommendations, to us trying to influence the advisory planning committee, to all board members having the same information, otherwise it could be seen as a risk of hindering the process. We found this discouraging as the intention was to supply as much visual and factual information as possible. Looking at a property on a map is not the same as looking at it physically. The rural character of this area has much going for it, from a bubbling creek to wildlife to peace and serenity, but still being fully serviced. A 7-acre property would provide a family a rural homestead in an ever-increasing housing crisis. Ourselves, as well as our immediate neighbors, would recommend our application be approved and therefore go to a public meeting. We welcome any questions and want to thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'll ask the board if they have any questions of the applicants. Don't see any hands, so again, thank you. If you can just take your seats back. Director Van Elfen, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. So this is zoned resource. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get the right terminology. Resource. If it's changed, will it go to ALC or ALR land? Or large country residential?
If it's out of the ALR now, it wouldn't be going into the ALR. This would be strictly just to subdivide it into parcels, but it would get a different zoning designation.
Thank you.
Director Knodel, I see a hand from you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. I always have a problem with a property that's bisected by any barrier. That presents unique problems for property owners. I've got a couple in my area. I don't normally support divisions in outlying areas, but I don't support properties being bisected either. So I'd have to support this one for that particular reason. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Director Bush.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the delegation. I would vote against this as a denial.
Okay. Director Gettins, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I completely hear what Director Knodel is saying. There are a number of properties out in Falder that are bisected by a road. And as we've all known for the past, I don't know, like 16 months, 18 months, we've been talking about this aquifer, the aquifer study and the impact on it. So it's always a challenging decision when we make this, but there's been no doubt from the community that they are in support of making the OCP stronger to protect the rural area and the rural character out in Falder. The letters that are in support are the immediate neighbors that also have similar properties. And the concern is if you let one go through and then you have to let the other and the other and the other, and then it starts adding up. And we've all recognized the value and the importance of this watershed. So it's always hard to make these hard decisions, and I get that, and it's part of why we're sitting at this table, because it's the community view that we've also need to protect, and it's not just the one application. And so some of the responses I received after this board put forward the amendments last meeting was, "This is great news. Thank you so much for all that you've done to facilitate this review. Allowing unsustainable levels of development in areas like ours is a recipe for disaster. Great news. A bunch of us have been pushing this for better water protection back in 2003 and earlier. I've lived in Falder for over 34 years. Hopefully this will help remind all the board members the necessity of looking at issues regarding rural development in a more depth perspective. I hope everyone can work together to consider responsible development. These stronger policy will help the board. The policies have been in place with the OCP since 2018, and we've just made them stronger. This last one is thank you for your work on this. Although we're not part of the water system and have our own well, we are concerned with underground water availability. We can't deny the importance of a watershed, which is why I'm saying no to this development. And I wish it were different. I wish we had better data and we could move forward with things with more confidence, but water is everything. And the community has made it clear that they support the board and they just support the recommendations that we passed at the last meeting. So this has to be a denial from me.
Okay. Any further discussion? I've seen a tentative hand. Director Federico, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So given the lot size, is it not possible for the owners to put a house on that parcel now and drill a well to give water to a home there currently?
That's a question I can't answer. Maybe the planning department can answer that one. The existing zoning, does it allow for an accessory dwelling? Go ahead.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Anything further, Director Federico? Okay. That's the point. Director Bush?
Yeah, I kind of think the water issue is kind of fear-mongering. I mean, it's a possibility that, you know, it's nobody knows for sure. But the other thing is, if there's a drought and we run out of water, I mean, they haul water. I don't see a problem with it, but yeah. And besides that, even most of the water goes back into the system that they take out, just the same as it does at Okanagan Lake here. It just takes longer, that's all, but my point.
Okay. I see a hand from Director Gettens again.
Thanks. So this community and this area has experienced that where they've hauled water, and I don't think anybody is comfortable with that being a plan B. I know it's easy to say like, oh, it's just one more, it's just one more, but it isn't just one more. And if you look through all of the letters, the very last one talks about that there's quite a few properties that would like to subdivide. So we have policies in place. The staff have let the applicants know from day one that this likely won't be supported. Our OCP doesn't support it. Our bylaws don't support it. The recent studies don't support it. The APC doesn't support it. And the community doesn't support it. So there's the one application and we have all these other voices that don't deserve to be ignored either. So I think it's important that we follow the policies that we put in place.
Okay. Any further discussion? Director Holmes.
Yeah, I don't like to get involved in rural decisions, but I just know we do have a regional growth strategy, and the regional growth strategy is to direct growth to the urban growth areas, and this isn't one of them.
Okay. Prompts another comment from this side. Director Bush, go ahead.
Yeah, this isn't regional growth. Regional growth is a subdivision. This is where they can actually have another home there anyways.
Okay. Any further, Director Knodel, is that a new hand or? Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand there's other requests in the area. Are the other requests all bisected by this road? The bisection of a piece of property is quite a serious issue. And that in itself paints a different picture. Secondly, disallowing this isn't necessarily going to save you water. It may actually cost you more. So, you know, exercise caution when you take your steps.
Okay, and I seen a quick hand from Director Gettens. Go ahead. I think it's to answer that.
I was just going to say, you know, that's why you have a policy and you have exactly what Director Holmes just said too. You have bigger vision, so it's not a one-off, because that's where you get into complications. We just passed this policy at the last board meeting. The community is happy. The larger community is happy. Those we've heard of people, we heard from one of the people that live within the Falder water system saying they get it. They get that they can't subdivide, but water is more important. From the very beginning, because I sat on the OCP review committee, the people from Meadow Valley want this to remain rural. They don't want to see more development. They are concerned about the water. So I think that the prudent thing here to do is to follow the policies that we set on the board for the board to follow. That's why we put in all the effort. That's why we put in the money. The policies help decide, make these decisions for us and help guide us to make these decisions. And right now, that area doesn't want any more development, and we don't have any reason to believe that it can be sustained out there.
Okay, seeing no more hands, again, this one is a rural vote. I'll call the question. All those in favor? All right, opposed? Directors Bush, Knodel, and Coyne opposed. Motion's carried. Down to C7. I think we're, well, I'll go to the CAO anyway, but I believe we got to probably likely defer this with our discussion from this morning. So, CAO?
Yeah, this was what we discussed under committee this morning, Mr. Chair, and it was deferred to a future meeting. Although the motion was on the floor on April 20th, and it was deferred to this meeting. So this motion is on your floor.
It is on the floor and probably should be deferred again till we, I would not give it a date, but give it the wording of until we've met with the province and the feds on this study that was done. If someone's willing to make that motion. Moved, seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Oh, a question?
Sorry, just a thought. Through the chair, with the province initiating this study, would it not be appropriate to ask them to help support the costs of having the contractor come and present to us?
I believe they should be.
So would we action that with a letter to them or something that we're getting that support? Like we've asked for the contractor to come back. We were told that there's a cost to that. This is our chance to ask for support to cover that cost.
I see what you're saying. I assumed they would be covering it because they covered the cost of the or the study itself, and it'd be my opinion they should be paying for a presentation as well. But if we want to make sure that's done that way, we can add that as an amendment. Right now, it's just to defer this until we've heard from the province and the feds from this morning's. Go ahead.
So in the earlier meeting, didn't we say that we wanted them to come in person?
Yeah.
And that we wanted, but that was a motion out of a committee, so we would need to repeat that through this motion today? And
no, but this is because this morning's presentation was a presentation on the study. This motion that's before us here was actually from, I think it's almost 2 years ago now, that kept getting deferred until this study was completed. So this is to defer it again until we've heard from them one more time, and maybe then we can come to a decision. If we want them to go the route of contributing to the cost, I think that needs to be separate after we deal with this, if you would, because it can't be really amending into a deferral. So we know what we're doing. I see a hand from Director Gettens, and then I call the question. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, just to confirm, we're just voting on deferring the administrative recommendation until a later date. And then we're going to talk about how, okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I got that.
So everybody's clear, just on deferral. Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Deferral would be everybody. Okay, so, okay. Those in favor? They get to put their hand up. Those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. And I will go back to Director Monteith. Do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I'm not even sure who to word it towards, or
But that-
I need some guidance, but
Okay.
sort of getting to my end goal.
That we ask the province and feds to,
Financially support having the contractor present to us in committee. They wanted us to wait
Yeah.
for the study. We need more information from the contractor. It's only fair.
okay, is there a seconder for that? Seconded, it's on the floor. Any discussion? Go ahead, Director Campbell.
Thank you, through the chair. Just
Or Director Watt, I should say. I'm
does
thinking of your first name.
Staff need us to make this recommendation? Because ultimately, all we're doing, as far as I can gather, is we're requesting that they pay for it. Because ultimately, if they don't, are we going to say no to them coming? Because that was our ultimate goal to begin with. So this is simply a request for staff to have provincial government pay for this. So do you actually need a motion for that?
CAO?
No, we can pass that along, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Seeing no more hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Motion carries. Well, we have a motion on the floor. It needs to be dealt with. We will pass that on. Brings us over to C8, Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw Review, CAO.
This is that discussion that we had between two different forms of enforcement. One is the Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw Review, which we're now recommending be amended to take out some redundant bylaws, and really what we're proposing is that we just use this for development permits and soil removal and deposit bylaw. And then our main enforcement tool will be the bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, which allows us to enforce in a much simpler manner through an adjudication instead of going to court. So we're recommending that this be given first, second, third, and adoption, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Director Gettens? I'm
Thank you,
assuming
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I just want to make it, like, just to confirm, we talked about this before, that this is just a tool for bylaw. They don't have to enforce this if they want. This is just one of the tools that they can use. I just want to get confirmation on that, please.
I'll go to Director. Mr. Garish, go ahead.
Short answer is that's my understanding, yes. It doesn't require it.
All right.
Thanks, Chair. Just as a quick follow, the reason I'm asking is the soil deposition bylaw is still in the testing phases here in Greater West Bench, and I don't want to see a citizen who just made an honest mistake get fined. You know, if it's a tool, I'm comfortable with that. I just want to have some flexibility allowed for the staff. So thanks for the clarification.
Okay. So direction on this? Are we going to move forward with it? Seeing no hands coming up very fast. Nobody's prepared to move it? We had the big, long discussion on this, thinking we needed higher fines. Director Gettens, go ahead.
Well, I'll move it to get the discussion on the table. So
Okay, you're moving it. It's seconded. It's on the floor. So discussion. Is that a new hand or, okay, left over? You wanted to say something, Director Federico? You're, okay. Director Coyne, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's been a lot of discussion on how to find more and I think this is your opportunity. So we have very limited tools in our toolbox. This is one of them. This is our chance.
I agree. We don't have a lot, so any more we can use or more options we have, the better when and if we need them. Director Coyne Senior, go ahead.
I 100% agree, and I'll wholeheartedly support this. Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? This one is a corporate vote, just so everybody's aware. Seeing no more hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. That brings us down to C9. There was the one item removed from the consent agenda. I'll go to Director Monteith.
And through the chair. So I'm looking to my colleagues at the board table, looking for some advice. So my Kaleden Park and Recreation Commission, who are an amazing group of volunteers, they are struggling, and it's ongoing, it's continuous. I pulled their minutes from their meeting just to highlight some information. So they made motions in September for information from staff. They're yet to get that. They asked for support. They haven't gotten it. They've asked for information. They don't get it. They've asked to be involved. They don't get it. They've given suggestions. They're not heard. So I'm struggling, and I'm looking to my other directors at the board table. How are things going with recreation? Are your commissions happy? Is it just mine that's struggling? But when I have a commission who, they're excited to come to a board meetings, their committee meetings, they get there, the only thing on the agenda, the only item on the agenda is a quarterly report. No staff show up. It's really hard. And they're feeling really disrespected, not heard, wondering why they're there, why the board appoints them if they're not being utilized and heard. So I guess I'm looking for some feedback. Thanks.
Okay. Director Fedrigo?
Thank you through the chair. We, for our Naramata Parks and Rec Committee, are feeling similar. We did ask and did have a sit down with most of the community services department and our commission to try and help repair relationships, and just there's some struggle and challenges with communication that have gotten a little better since, but we're still struggling a bit, and our wonderful volunteers on our rec commission are also feeling similar to Kaleden.
Okay. Director Roberts, I see a hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just like to state in regards to our commission and our rec manager that we're incredibly happy and have everything is working really well, and they really feel like they're a part of the conversation and the process. So we here in the Similkameen seem to have a different experience, but we do understand the frustrations on the other side.
Okay. Am I missing a hand? Oh, sorry, man. Director Taylor, go ahead.
Yeah, our Parks and Rec Commission hasn't yet got going. Speaking in the past tense, I think our rec side has been works well with the community, and I think the parks have a huge job on their hands, but I think the commission and staff struggle to understand how to communicate with each other. And then you've got a director and a board, and so you got 4 parties, and it's a struggle. So I would say I have to agree, and I would be welcome to further discussion. I think everybody's trying to make it work. I'm not faulting staff who, frankly, I think are out there in 35-degree weather and they're doing great work. I don't know whether it's just how do we manage expectations of what the commission does and how quickly they can get stuff onto the agenda or what. I don't know, but I do feel that further discussion would help. There have been times when we've had those discussions, and I think it does help. It kind of goes a bit like a sine wave, So I don't know what the answer is, but I would have to say that I'd certainly be open to further discussion on this.
All right. Director Gettens, I see a hand.
Yeah, thanks to the chair. It's hard to hear when volunteers are struggling, and because I'm sure that also means that staff are struggling, and it doesn't feel very good to anybody. We have been in discussions about a working committee for emergency service review, and I'm wondering if this is something that we should do as well for recreation. I think there's kind of been bits and pieces of this conversation happening for a while, so maybe we need to just sit down as a group to those impacted. It's great to hear that the Similkameen feels really great. We have a pretty quiet recreation and parks committee, so I would have to talk with them as well about it, but maybe we need to take it offline and have a conversation and see where we can bridge some of these gaps and then bring it back to the board, that discussion. I just recognize that, it's hard to get a board of 20 involved in a group in a smaller sub-regional discussion. So just my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Director Holmes.
Okay, this is totally not my place to say this, but I'll say it anyway. Yeah, providing recreation is expensive, and you need a certain population base to be able to do it well. And for those smaller communities surrounding Penticton, it might be worth asking yourselves, can we afford this? And you might get better value for your money just disbanding your recreation service and paying the city of Penticton a little bit of money every year to be part of their system. That's just an idea I throw out there, and you never know.
It is a suggestion, and who knows? Before we go to Director Monteith, I think we do need a motion to receive these. Is that correct, Ms. Molden?
This actually should come down in corporate, but that's fine if you come here. Yeah, so there should be a motion to receive.
Okay, at some point we need a motion to receive here. So Director Monteith?
And thank you. I appreciate hearing from my colleagues how things are going and knowing that I'm not alone. And it's good for my community to hear that as well, because they have felt that they're alone. So I do appreciate that conversation. So I would like to make 2 motions, actually. Well, maybe not even 1 motion for sure, and then a suggestion. So a motion to accept these minutes to the board, please.
Okay, moved, seconded. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries.
And then, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
To follow up, my suggestion is a couple years ago, we had CAO Newell come to our commission meeting. And that was really empowering to my commission. They felt that they were heard, they got some great ideas, they utilized some of those ideas, but we do have some new board members that are looking maybe for that guidance. So I hope that our next commission meeting would have staff in attendance, and maybe CAO Newell could join and then perhaps stay after and staff leave and help the commission come up with some ideas on how to work better with staff, because they are struggling.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Conant.
Just as an outsider view of this, similar to Director Holmes, shouldn't it be they come up with the ideas? It's what we do in our committees, but you as the representative would bring them forward to staff. That would be, seems to me, the direction it should take.
Through the chair.
Director Monteith?
And through the chair, I have many times.
All right. I'm thinking, I didn't see Mr. Newell shaking his head no, so he's probably agreeable if it's an opportunity to meet at a date that works.
Yeah, I've discussed this with Director Monteith, Mr. Chair, and we're working on it.
Sounds good. Down to Community Services, Willowbrook Fire Hall, CAO.
So the Willowbrook Fire Hall is located on 2 pieces of property. One, the hall, and then right behind it, they have a crown parcel where they do their training, and they have their telecommunications tower. The license of occupation on that parcel expired in 2021, so the province has now come back to us and said, do you want to renew this? So we are recommending that we enter into this license of occupation with the province for that parcel, Mr. Chair, and it would be for 15 years.
Okay, I'll go to Director Knodel. Direction on this?
Yeah, I might add, we haven't quite got the tower yet, but we're working on it. I'd like to move the recommended administrative recommendation, please.
Okay, he's moving it, seconded, it's on the floor. Any discussion? Fairly straightforward. Again, this is a corporate vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Legislative Services, OK Falls Incorporation Study Committee, CAO.
This is the appointment of 10 members to the incorporation study, Mr. Chair, so we're recommending that these be appointed.
Go to Director Taylor.
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to really thank all the community members for considering this and these individuals for stepping up. And I'd like to make the administrative recommendation that these 10 individuals be appointed as members of the Okanagan Falls Incorporation Study Committee.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on this? Seeing no hands, this one is again a corporate vote. So all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. E2, the second part of this Okanagan Falls Incorporation study, CAO.
Yeah, this is the contracting of a consultant to carry out the works for the committee. And as happens these days, it's a consolidation of a number of associates that we want to award to. So this is the main consulting firm of Nielsen Strategies, but then also engaging his associates, Horseman Strategies, Left Side Partners, and Inspire Creative for an amount up to $120,000 plus tax. And that if there are costs in excess of that, they get attributed to the Area D Rural Projects budget.
Okay. Again, Director Taylor.
Yeah, I'd like to enthusiastically move this recommendation. Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, I am.
I get it. I get it. A seconder for that. Thank you. Any discussion? Again, a corporate vote. Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Down to E3, the Mosquito Control Service Area, CAO.
This is to make this program a true regional program, Mr. Chair. So it is to include Karamias, Princeton, and Area E in the Mosquito Control Service, and we're recommending this be adopted.
That was quick. Director Monteith, I'm assuming that's a motion. You're moving it. Is there a seconder for that? It's on the floor. Any discussion? Gosh, seeing no hands. Again, another corporate. How come it says rural vote on mine, but it should be corporate, correct? All right, just wanted to make sure of that. So it's a corporate vote. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. CAO report.
Just following up on our discussion on the Emergency Program Act modernization earlier, Mr. Chair, there was an email that came out today with additional information on it, a new discussion document, sort of a framework for not the legislation itself, because again, it hasn't been into the House yet, but giving more information on where they're heading. And they certainly are promoting cooperation with Indigenous communities, and also more focus on the hazard and risk assessment part of the Sendai framework, and then also some other changes to the emergency program response and mitigation. So we'll be looking into that, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to further discuss it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Down to other business chairs report from myself. I think it was, I'm not exactly sure of the date, but the powwow between the lakes. I attended that grand entry thing, and I would like to extend a thank you to Director Fedrigo for filling in for Director Coyne, who couldn't make it last minute due to some unforeseen circumstances. So thanks for attending and helping out with that. It was an interesting grand entry, I think it was called, that we had to partake in. And it was something, I don't know how many actually attended, but it was interesting to see the powwow take place and what went on there. So I would encourage those that didn't go in the future to take some time and actually experience it. It's quite unique. Sure, go ahead, Director McCorduff.
Thank you. I was asked to go on the Sunday, at which I did, and I thought I was manning a table. And instead, I was out taking part in the parade and dancing. And I made sure that I told Chief Clarence Louie about this, who thought it was great. He was there on the Friday. So I just want to say to all of the to RDOS people that were there, because I know that there were people there on Friday and Saturday and Sunday. It was a great experience, and I'm glad I went and didn't just man the table. So thank you. I think well done, RDOS.
Yeah, and we should extend the thank you to staff for attending. I think they were there all the days. I'm not sure who, but there was someone there all the time. So thanks for that. Director Gettins, hand up, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just since we're talking about it, because it's on my list of things here. I was asked on Sunday, I think we were the main sponsor for Sunday, so I was able to say a few words on behalf of the regional district after the grand entry. I'd never experienced a grand entry before, and I actually found it quite emotional. And now I feel like I'm going to get emotional again about it. So by the time I got up there to speak, I don't actually even really remember what I said. I think I was just trying to hold it together and say, and to welcome everybody. But what I wish I said, or maybe I said, I don't know, is that, at this table, we don't often have a unanimous vote on things to support. And this table did vote unanimously to support that as a grant sponsor. And I just think we did a really good job on that. And I know there's powwows throughout all the regions. And it was something that we should maybe look further into being a part of, because it was really, really special. And especially to see all the different communities represented in the skills and the dancing and the music and the regalia. Like, it was really spectacular. So well done to the table for supporting it, and staff, always the mighty team behind the scenes getting it done as professional as ever. So thanks again.
Okay, Director Bloomfield.
Thank you, and through the chair and to everybody, just to let you know that the response from the Four Seasons committee that organized that event and the Penticton Indian Band was that, and I quote, "It was a fantastic event." They felt it was a really wonderful event. They are very, very appreciative of all the support that they were shown, both by the city and the RDOS and District of Summerland. And I think that they were surprised by the amount of interest that we showed in learning about their culture. And they very, very much appreciated the presence of everybody there. And I think it was a tremendous success, and it's something to build on to continue to improve relations with First Nations.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. All right, moving on. Director's motions is next on the agenda. I understood there was a potential one from Director Coyne. Go ahead.
I'll try and get this right. Bill wrote me a little script here this morning, so I'll be bringing forward a motion to send a letter of support for the Copper Mountain Mine application to amend Mines Act permit M29. But first, I'd move that we suspend section 6.6 of the board procedure bylaw to amount to allow this motion to be considered at this meeting due to regulatory process of the mines permit application.
Okay, so the motion is to deal with it today, this meeting. Yes. Okay, is there a seconder for that? Seconded, it's on the floor. Any discussion? Go ahead, Director Conants.
I just need a explanation and
That will come when we deal with the actual motion to send a letter. This is just, will we deal with it today?
thank
Okay.
you. Thank you so much.
Anything on that further? Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. So back to Director Coyne for the actual motion.
I move that the regional district send a letter of support for the Copper Mountain Mine application to amend Mines Act Permit M29.
Okay, he's moving it and seconded. Discussion. Now I suspect is where she would like to know what that actually is. Correct?
Can you
Director
please
Conant?
give me a thorough explanation on the benefits of doing that and maybe the why we wouldn't want to do that?
Go ahead,
So,
Director Coyne.
The mine is making application to, they call it I think they call it their Ingerbell expansion. It's to reopen the old pit at Ingerbell, which was kind of finished up in the late 90s when they closed the mine. And it's always been part of the mine plan to go back there and mine it. But due to regulatory changes, they have to reapply to the Ministry of Mines to amend their application. And this goes before the minister. I believe it's on Monday. They send this, they have to have their stuff in for. These things happen really fast. We just got this the other day, Tuesday, I believe it was, to ask if we could support this. They employ 500 people on site, and throughout the province, it extends to about 2,500 jobs. So it's a huge driver for not only Princeton's economy, but of the entire region. The mine has got an incredibly good record as far as environmental impacts go. They are incredibly transparent, as all the directors from the Smeltmine will attest to, that they constantly invite us up to keep us informed of what their mine plan is, what's going on. They did a diversion or realignment, they call it, on Wolf Creek to make sure that water didn't go through their waste dumps and through the tailings. They kept everybody, the upper, the lower bands, as well as all of the regional directors were all part of that. They've been a really great corporate citizen. And yeah, I would love to send a letter of support for their endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Director Bloomfield, I see a hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, Director Coyne, you said to deal with section M29, I think, of the BC Mine Act. What is that? What does that say? And is it the BC Mine Act you're referring to?
Yeah, that's the number, their permit number, from what I understand.
Oh,
They're they call them operating permits.
okay. So what are we're voting to endorse this M29 or
just send a letter of support?
Just a letter of support for
we're
the mine
endorsing.
to be able to do their expansion.
Okay. Director Bush?
Yeah, so does this mean we're going against the two bands, the upper and the lower Smeltmine bands, and their negotiations with the mine?
Director Coyne, can you answer that?
No, I can't answer that, but looks like Spencer's got his hand up there.
One of the Director Coynes will. Go ahead, Director Coyne Jr.
This is separate from the negotiations at the Copper Now Hud Bay And the upper and lower band will have on their, what do they call it, participation agreements. That is between them and Copper Mountain Mine, not between us and them. This has to do with the permit. Since since my first term, Copper Mountain Mine has made it very clear that the plan is to expand over into what they're calling New Ingerbelle. It's the Ingerbelle side. That's the highway side of the operation. Everybody passes by it on your way to Vancouver. In order to get the permits to continue on, they may have to face this environmental assessment. The province has deemed originally that there was no need for an environmental assessment, but under legislation, an Indian band can request a review, and now it's in front of the minister. The town of Princeton's already supported or sent a letter with our position, which is that we don't understand the need for an environmental assessment since it was never deemed necessary in the first place.
Okay. Anything further? Oh, a hand from Director Gettens. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, this is not in my wheelhouse, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this. So does the mine, I want to know, why does the mine have to reapply if they've already owned the Ingerbelle area? And yeah, why do you have to reapply?
Because every time you do something, sorry.
Go ahead.
Because there's this catch-all in the legislation. Whenever they already have the mineral rights, so now they're amending their operating permit so that they can change their original mine plan. When you do that, you have to reapply. But there's a little section in the legislation that if so there's a section in the environmental part of it that they can the only people that can request a environmental review are the Indian bands. And the ministry has already deemed that there's no need for an environmental review. But now, because there's this phrase in there, now the Indian bands can request it. And the Lower Similkameen Indian Band has requested an environmental review. And as Director Bush pointed out, there are ongoing negotiations over a participation agreement, which is a revenue share and all that sort of thing. But
Okay, and then just as a quick follow-up then, when did the ministry, thank you, when did the ministry deem that no environmental review is necessary? Is that recent or is it quite some time ago?
Some time ago.
Okay. And what would the letter say? I guess it's a big, like I said, like it's big, and I know you're on a time crunch because I think you need this by Tuesday. Is that right?
Yeah, they sent it to us the other day with like 1 week to respond.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough position to put somebody like me in that doesn't have all the background information, and that's what I'm trying to figure out here because I don't know enough about it. But what would the letter? I'm curious as to what the letter would say because I am in support of for sure. I know that mine is very important to the area and to the economy, but I'm not clear on what the letter will support.
Sorry.
I was going to say it'd probably be written by Mr. Newell. Could you give us an idea of what you intended to say there?
Yeah, really all we're doing, Mr. Chair, is advising that it's an important socioeconomic enterprise within the regional district of Okanagan-Similkameen and certainly for the town of Princeton. As was mentioned, it does employ over 500 people and it has a very sound environmental record. They won an award, I think 2 years ago, for getting to net zero on greenhouse gas emissions. And they're very generous with the community and the nonprofit groups in the area, and it would be a shame to lose them. I think really what this application is for is to double the lifespan of the mine. It's got, I think, an estimated now about a 12-year lifespan, and this new area that they would be allowed to go back in would extend that by about another 12 years.
Thank you. Any follow-up on that, Director Gettens? And then, okay, Director Taylor and then Director Holmes.
Yeah, well, actually going to staff, I'd really appreciate, so that's the sort of positive side. If you've sort of given this some thought, and we've given it all of 5 minutes thought, do you see any negatives with indicating RDOS support?
Frankly, I just can't imagine us not supporting it.
Director Holmes?
Yeah, thanks. So I can certainly support this, but I'm just looking at the provincial government website, EPIC. I'm not sure what that is, Environmental Protection something. And it talks about the process which Spencer just talked about, and it says the EAO, the Environmental Assessment Office, I guess, has begun its review of the request from the Lower Similkameen Indian Band, which will include seeking feedback from First Nations, the public, Copper Mountain Mine, local governments, and other government agencies. And this was dated June 30th. So presumably on this, they're going to be coming to us anyway, right?
On the assessment, environmental assessment, possibly, yes. Go ahead, Director Coyne.
No, this is the review section. So in our letter that we got, it says as part of a review process, the EAO is inviting you to provide the EAO with comments regarding the designation application. I would like to request that your comments be submitted to the EAO by July 7th, so which is actually tomorrow. Part of their application is also their tailings. We have 5 years left. If this gets I'll just be blunt because the mine won't be. The process will take longer than the permitting to keep the mine open right now. So with this, if we don't, even if the process happens, it will take longer than our operating ability is. So that would mean they would lay off 500 employees, and the 70% of those people live in Princeton and 20% live in the rest of the Similkameen Valley. So.
Okay, anything further? I'll go to Director Conans.
So we're supporting expansion and not saying anything about waiving environmental requirements.
Not at this stage is my
Chair.
understanding, but okay. Director Gettins and then Director Bloomfield. And then I'll go to Director Coyne. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Can I just hear what Director Quinn had to say first, please?
You wanted to hear,
I just wanted to hear what Director Coyne was going to say to Helena, because it might just change.
Okay.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
So the
Director
term
Coyne.
expansion, yeah, the term expansion is a misdemeanor because Copper Mountain Mine is two pits. There's well, it used to be more than that, but there's 2 pits. There's the Ingerbell pit, which is on the highway side, and there's the Copper Mountain side of the operation, which used to be 4 pits. It's turned into 1. So what they want to do is they want to go back to the other pit, and this is what Copper Mountain Mine has always done. They go from one pit to the other pit, depending on the quality of ore and where they can source the ore. So they're played out most of the ore that they have on the Copper Mountain side. So now what they want to do is they want to go back to the Ingerbell side and mine the ore there, which has always been part of the plan. That's where in the 1970s, when they reopened, 1971 or 2 is when they reopened Copper Mountain Mine after it was an underground. Started on Ingerbell as a open pit mine. It transferred over to the Copper Mountain side in around 76, 77, somewhere in there. They then mined that until they went back over the Ingerbell side. They go back and forth. The quality of the ore on the Ingerbell side has more gold and silver deposits, which means they get a higher revenue. The Copper Mountain side is almost all copper, so it's a lower grade ore body, so they don't get as much revenue. So they want to go back to the other side until they can unless they can find more copper on the Copper Mountain side. But right now, so the idea of this being an expansion is not real, and it's a misuse of words. It's a reopening of the other mine. It's all this is they want to reopen that pit, but in order to reopen that pit, they have to have this permit approved. In order to have this permit approved, the government was all ready to move forward, But now there's this holdup because the Lower Smoke Indian Band has asked for an environmental review, which will put us past the timeline of the existing operation, and it will shut the mine down.
Okay.
Did that answer my question?
I don't know. Go ahead.
We are asking for an expansion in the letter, but we're not asking to waive an environmental in the letter. We're not.
I don't think we were, but
We're not.
CAO, I see him getting ready here.
Yeah, just again, Mr. Chair, it's not an expansion. It's just a reopening of a previously disturbed area because there's a higher value of ore there. And no, we didn't comment on any of what the Indian bands are objecting to. They're certainly welcome to have their comments and thoughts as well. But for us, we're interested in the socioeconomic benefit of this enterprise to the region.
Okay. Thank you. Director Bloomfield.
Thank you. And through the chair, and this is, I think this is actually a big ask for, 5 minutes notice. And, because there's so many layers to this kind of application. And I think that, Director Coyne Jr. has laid out, the facts very, very well. Obviously, he has great knowledge of the facts, and that's great. But where's Copper Mountain in this? Where's is it? Shouldn't they be coming to ask for this? And if it's that important, if it means losing 500 jobs, then shouldn't they be at least making a representation to this board of directors, to get their support? I understand, that there's time crunches on late submissions applications maybe, but I find it hard to believe that, we're in a situation where we have to make a decision in the next 5 minutes based on, and 500 jobs rely on it. That, to me, doesn't sound right. However, I mean, I understand the position that they may be in, but yeah, I just have some problems with it coming to us like this, and we have to make a decision. So maybe a suggestion is in the letter, if we vote to write a letter of support, could it be included in that letter that it would, that our support is subject to them clearing any environmental requirements that may be, that may be put upon by the provincial government, and subject to them receiving the approval from any First Nations that are affected?
That kind of changes the thing completely, I think, but I'll go to Director Coyne Sr. first. Go ahead.
So Copper Mountain Mine did not ask me to bring this to the board. They asked me if I would give them a letter of support, and I brought this forward to the board, believing that there would be much more weight on it if it came from the entire board, not just from the local director. Like I said, there's a time element that they got handed, and we're not trying to circumvent any regulations. It's just if all this stuff goes ahead, the bottom line is that it's going to cost our community a huge amount of money. There's ongoing bargaining or negotiations, I guess is a better word, with the bands and the mine. Nobody's trying to shortcut anybody here. It's all just if we lose 500 jobs out of our community, then that's pretty darn devastating to not only us, but the other 2,000 plus people that jobs are associated with the operation of this mine. It's There, again, it's not any attempt to try and circumvent anybody's rights or abilities to appeal these things. This is just, the simple question is, do we support industry and keeping people working? Nobody's trying to shortchange anybody here. Everybody still has the opportunity. I mean, the city of Penticton could write a letter or for or against whatever you wanted to. It's just, right now, it's a very time constraining issue. Nobody's trying to, like I said, work around anything. It's just a letter of support. Thank you.
Okay. The other Director Coyne.
Yeah, so this is the last thing I'm gonna say because I want to get back to my holidays. So this letter, this whole thing came about on Tuesday afternoon last week. I don't know when the mine reached out to the other Director Coyne, but it came out that day with this timeline that was set out by the province. This does not mean that there are no environmental requirements. All environmental requirements under the Mines Act and all the other acts still remain in place. What it means is there's no need for further environmental assessment because it is already an active mine site. That's why it was deemed that there was no need for an environmental assessment because it was already a mine reopening as a mine. I have my own opinions on the reason for this, but I will not voice those. What is going on here right now is that under the legislation, the ministry never seen the need for an environmental assessment, but because one of the Indian bands are allowed to request this, it is now happening. So now the entire process has started. But we got 1 week's notice to do this. That's it. That's all we get. This is the comment period. This is all they give us. This is to see, and the minister will decide whether or not there needs to be a review. This is only to see if there needs to be a review. If there is a review, then it can take years for a review to happen. So it's not as simple as that. But all the environmental issues, all the water, the mining, everything else stays in place, air quality, et cetera, all stay in place. It just means that another environmental review of the existing operation does not need to happen. That's all we're looking at. Anyways, that's all I'm gonna.
No. Director Bush?
Yeah, I was just thinking I should excuse myself from the vote because I have family that works there.
Yeah, it could be a conflict if you want to excuse yourself. Director Taylor, and then we should move forward with this. Go ahead. Enlighten us.
No, not at all, but I just feel, as others do, that we're being rushed into this, but that's life. I think staff are aware of some of our reservations. We don't need to say what we have our concerns about, but we can say that we're generally in support of socioeconomic development within the area and what that includes relative to this mine. So I think we've kind of given staff enough direction to write a general letter.
Agreed. Last chance, Director Gettins, and then I'm going to call the question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree with Director Taylor. It's unfortunate what the timing is, but I know that the CEO has written letters before around in economic and social development for the Film Commission, and it's always very diplomatically written. And I think anybody can recognize it's a time crunch, and they're looking for support to keep this going and the community going. So I can support it. I am frustrated again with the process of not having enough time for good discussion, but I'm in favor of this.
Okay, thank you. I am going to call the question, and this one is again corporate vote. So all those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Board members' verbal updates. Anything to report from your communities? Is that a hand, Director Gettins? Go ahead.
Yeah. It is. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the PIB. I was invited to their winter house opening. It's just outside of Outmust School, so it's a traditional building. And I'm not going to try and say the name. I've been practicing trying to say it in Silk language, and I'm not going to put you through it. But the house is really, really interesting. It's set up with Wi-Fi and electricity as well, and it is available for rent for team building and that kind of thing. It was a really cool opportunity, so I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, cool. Anything else from anybody's community? Director Taylor, it looks like you're prepped to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder if we need to be looking at homeless in parks and bylaws. Other communities are starting to do it. We don't have emergency facilities for them to overnight in. And so my understanding is homeless people can sleep in our parks. And that's a problem, you know. We don't have bylaw people to deal with any fallout as a result of that. There's no one to phone.
It sounds like a notice of motion coming.
So I'm just
think about
flagging
it.
it.
Sure. And I seen a hand from Director Monteith. Go ahead.
And through the chair. So I have 2 points. So this Saturday is our second annual Kaleden Community Day. All day, start in the morning, pancake breakfast, then lunch by Doug's Homestead. And evening we have the Harshmallows playing live outside. So it'll be a good time. So please come and join, come say hi. I just want to share some sad news. In Twin Lakes this morning, a family lost their home. In an area that has no fire protection. So it's pretty sad for that family. And I'm concerned about the community. And I've had many residents reach out and ask about how do we start a fire department. So just know that that is definitely a conversation that may come back to this table. So thank you. Oh, and watch the news. I just got recorded for an interview.
All right. Thanks for the update on that. And sorry to hear about the fire. Those are always devastating. Hate to see. Anything else to report from your communities? Seeing no hands, looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Done deal. Thank you, everybody.